Make sure y'all give this video a thumbs up. Or Kenneth, how about you wait till somebody comes in? Oh, but it is gonna be people who come in that watch the different live. I mean the past live. See, well, that's just me having a conversation in my head. Like that was two different voices that was talking. What? Should I just start the book since people want to be late? Yeah, we can start the book for the people that's gonna be late.
The real voyage of discovery consists not in seeing new landscapes, but in having new eyes. Proust. Bad things happen because of what we did in good times. Good things happen because of what we did in bad times. Roberto C. Goizueta, former CEO, the Coca-Cola Company. The essence of knowledge is having it to use it. Confucius. Simon & Schuster Audio presents Peaks and Valleys, making good and bad times work for you, at work and in life. By Spencer Johnson, MD. Read by John Dossett.
Make sure you give this video a thumbs up. I really appreciate it.
Before the story. Early one rainy evening in New York, Michael Brown hurried to meet someone a friend had said might help him deal with a difficult time he was having. As he entered the small cafe, he had no way of knowing how valuable the next few hours would be. When he saw Ann Carr, he was surprised. He had heard she had been through some tough times herself and expected it to show on her. But she seemed upbeat and full of energy. After some preliminary conversation, he said, "You look like you're in a good place, despite the bad times I understand you've been through." She said, "I am in a good place, both in my work and in my life. But it's not in spite of the bad times, it's because of them, and how I learned to take advantage of them." Michael was puzzled. "How so?" he asked. "Well, for example, at work I thought our department was doing fine, but in reality we weren't. We've been successful, but we've become complacent. By the time we realized it, other companies were doing much better than we were. My boss became very unhappy with me. That's when I started feeling low, and the pressure to improve things in a hurry began. Each day became more stressful." Michael asked, "So, what happened?" She answered, "I heard a story last year from someone at work I respected. It changed how I looked at good and bad times. And what I do now is very different. The story helped me to become calmer and more successful, whether things are going well or not. Even in my personal life, I'll never forget it." "What was the story?" he asked. Anne was quiet for a moment, and then said, "Would it be all right if I asked you why you would like to know about it?" Michael reluctantly admitted that he was not feeling very secure in his job, and things were not going so well for him at home. He didn't need to say any more. She felt his embarrassment and said, "You sound like you need to hear the story as much as I did." Anne said she would tell Michael the story with the understanding that if he found it valuable, he would share it with others. He agreed, and Anne prepared Michael for what he was about to hear. She said, "I found that if you want to use the story to deal with the ups and downs that come at you, it helps if you listen with your heart
This book helped me a lot on my
and
journey. I ain't even
fill
gonna
in
lie
the
to
story
y'all.
with your own experience to see what is true for you. The insights in the story are often repeated, although in slightly different ways." Michael asked, "Why the repetition?" She
I was
answered,
just talking about repetition.
"Well, for me, it made it easier to remember them. And when I remembered the insights, I used them more." She admitted, I'm reluctant to change, so I need to hear something new often enough that at some point it gets past my critical, distrusting mind, becomes more familiar, and touches my heart. Then it becomes a part of me. And that's what happened after I thought a lot about the story. But you can discover that for yourself, if you like. Do you really think a story can make that big a difference? Michael asked. I'm in a pretty tough spot right now. Anne replied, in that case, what do you have to lose? All I can tell you is that when I applied what I got out of the story, it had a big impact. Some people, she cautioned, get very little from the story, while others get a great deal. It's not the story, it's what you take away from it that is so powerful. And that's up to you, of course. Michael nodded. Okay, I think I would really like to hear it. So Anne started to tell the tale over dinner, and then continued through dessert and coffee. She began. The story of peaks and valleys. Chapter 1. Feeling low in a valley. Once there was a bright young man who lived unhappily in a valley, until he went to see an old man who lived on a peak. When he was younger, he had been happy in his valley. He played in its meadows and swam in its river. The valley was all he had ever known, and he thought he would spend his whole life there. Some days in his valley were cloudy, and some were sunny. But there was a sameness to his daily routine that he found comforting. However, as he grew older, he began to see what was wrong more often than he noticed what was right. He wondered why he had not noticed before how many things were wrong in the valley. As time went on, the young man became increasingly unhappy,
7.
although he wasn't sure why.
7 kids.
He tried working at different jobs in the valley, but none turned out to be what he had hoped for. In one job,
5
his
girls
boss
and
always
2
seemed to
boys.
criticize him for what he did wrong, and never noticed all the things he did right. In another, he was one of so many employees that it didn't seem to matter to anyone whether he worked hard or hardly worked at all. His contribution seemed invisible, even to himself. Once, he thought he had finally found what he wanted. He felt appreciated and challenged. He worked with capable colleagues, and he was proud of the company's product. He worked his way up and became manager of a small department. Unfortunately, he felt his job was not secure. His personal life was no
Is
better.
any job ever
One
secure?
disappointment seemed to follow another.
I doubt it.
He thought his friends didn't understand, and his family told him he was just going through a phase. The young man wondered if he would be better off someplace else.
Hey,
Sometimes the young man
my
would
kids
stand in the
has
meadow
pushed
and
me
look up
to
at the range
grow
of
and be
majestic
like
peaks
a
that
real
rose high
man.
above
Like,
his valley. He would
set a
imagine
good
himself
example.
standing on the nearby peak.
When you got 7 kids, like you have to understand, like they can easily be influenced by the world. And knowing how I was raised and how I grew up, like, I'm not about to let my kids go down the path I went because I didn't have a dad. Like so, for me to have 6 kids, like that live with me, and my oldest son live with his mom, who like takes good care of him, and I talk to him every single day. Like so, my kids are in way better position than I was at their age. So, like, and like I'm a businessman, like so I find time for them as well. Like so, hey, doing the best I can, cause like I said, I ain't had no guidance, and this life definitely didn't come with no fucking instructions. So, just doing the best I can.
Well, he felt better. But the more he compared the peak to his valley, the worse he felt. He spoke to his parents and friends about going to the peak, but they talked only about how difficult it was to reach the peak, and how comfortable it was to stay in the valley.
Don't
They
you
all
guys feel
discouraged
like
him
that?
from going where they themselves had never been. The young man loved his parents, and knew there was some truth to what they said. But he also knew that he was a different person from his father and mother. Sometimes he felt there might be a different way of life outside the valley, and he wanted to discover it for himself. Maybe on the peak he could gain a better view of the world. But then doubt and fear crept in again, and he thought he would stay where he was. For a long time, the young man could not bring himself to leave his valley. Then one day, he recalled his early youth and realized how much had changed since then. He was no longer at peace with himself. He wasn't sure why he changed his mind, but he suddenly decided he had to go visit that mountaintop. He put his fear aside and got ready to leave as quickly as he could. Then, he set out for the nearby peak. It was not an easy journey. It took him much longer than he thought it would take to make it less than halfway up the peak. But as the young man went higher, the cool breeze and fresh air revitalized him. From higher up, his valley looked smaller. When he had been down in the valley, the air seemed clean enough. But when he viewed the valley from above, he saw the pale brown stagnant air that was trapped there. Then he turned and continued upward. The higher he climbed, the more he could see. Suddenly, the trail he was following ended. With no trail to follow, he became lost among the thick trees that blocked out the light. He feared he would not find his way out. So he decided to cross a dangerously narrow ridge. As he did, he fell. Bruised and bleeding, he picked himself up and continued on. Eventually, he found a new path. The warnings of the people in the valley crossed his mind, but then he gathered his courage and kept climbing. The higher he went, the happier he became, knowing that he was leaving the valley and putting aside his fears. He was on his way to someplace new. As he rose above the clouds, he realized it was a beautiful day and imagined how the sunset would look from the summit. He could hardly wait to see it from up there. Chapter 2. Finding Answers. Despite the young man's eagerness, he did not reach the peak until nightfall. He sat down and groaned. "Oh no, missed it." A voice nearby in the darkness asked. "Missed what?" Startled, the young man turned and saw an old man sitting on a large boulder a few feet away. The young man stammered, "Sorry, I didn't see you there. I missed seeing the sunset from the peak. I'm afraid that's the story of my life." The old man laughed and said, "I know the feeling." At that moment, the young man had no way of knowing that he had just met one of the most peaceful and successful people in the world. He just seemed like a nice old man. After a while, the old man said, "So, what do you think of the view now?" "What view?" the young man asked. He squinted into the darkness, but could see no view. He was beginning to wonder about his new acquaintance. The old man leaned back and looked up at the sky. In turn, the young man also looked up and saw an array of stars sparkling overhead. He had never seen the stars so clearly from his valley. "Beautiful, isn't it?" the old man said. "Yes," the young man said in amazement. Gazing at the stars, he enjoyed a peaceful moment. They were there all the time, weren't they? "Well, yes and no," the old man said. "Yes, they were there all the time. You just needed to change what you were looking at." Then he added, "And no, not really. Scientists say that much of the light we are looking at now was sent millions of years ago from fading stars that are no longer there." The young man shook his head and said, "It's hard to know what's real and what's not." The old man said nothing. He just smiled. When the young man asked what he was smiling about, the old man replied, "I was just thinking how often I felt the same way at your age, trying to sort out fact from fiction." For a time they sat in silence, marveling at the light show taking place above them. Then the old man asked, "Why have you come up to the peak?" "I'm not sure," the young man admitted. "I guess I'm looking for something." He began telling the old man how unhappy he was down in his valley, and how he felt there had to be a better way. He told him about the jobs he had tried, the relationships that didn't seem to work, and the sense that he wasn't living up to his potential. He was surprised to hear himself revealing so much to a total stranger. The old man listened closely. After the young man had finished, the old man said, "I remember being down many times myself. I can still remember being fired from my first job. It was terrible. As hard as I tried, I couldn't find any work. So what did you do?" "Well, for too long, I just got angry and depressed. Things didn't go well for me. But then a good friend of mine, someone I will never forget, told me something that changed everything." "What was that?" the young man asked. "It was about what he called the peaks and valleys approach to good and bad times. He said, the more you use a peaks and valleys approach in your work and personal life, the more peaceful and successful you become." The old man added, "I was pretty skeptical at first, but it turned out to be true. And it had a huge impact on my career and my life." "How so?" the young man wanted to know. "It changed how I looked at the ups and downs in my life. And thanks to that, I changed what I did."
You like this?
The young man asked, "In what way?" "My friend helped me to discover 3 things. How to get out of a valley sooner, how to stay on a peak longer, and how to have more peaks and fewer valleys in my future." The young man wondered if it was too good to be true. But he was here looking for answers, and he was curious, so he asked, "Will you tell me about it?" The old man said, "I will, on the condition that if you find it useful, you will share it with others." "Why share it with others?" the young man said. The old man answered, "There are 2 reasons. First, to help them, and second, to help yourself. When people around you know how to make both good and bad times work for them, they worry less and do better. And that makes working and living with them more enjoyable for you." The young man said that if it worked for him, he would indeed share it with others. Then the old man began, "It may be useful to start with this. It is natural for everyone everywhere to have peaks and valleys, at work and in life." The young man was disappointed. This wasn't the answer he was hoping for. "What exactly do you mean by peaks and valleys?" he asked. "I mean your personal peaks and valleys. The highs and lows you feel at work and in life. These good or bad moments may last for minutes or for months or longer. Personal peaks and valleys are as natural as the physical peaks and valleys you see on the Earth's surface. Both kinds of highs and lows are scattered about and connected in similar ways. You can feel up in one area of your work or life and down in another. It's natural. It happens to everyone in the world, in every culture. It is part of being human." The young man sighed and said, "So I'm not the only one." The old man laughed. "Not even close. Though sometimes you might feel like it." He added, "There is
Why do
obviously
you feel
great
like we're the only
variety in the
person
up
that
and
be
down
going
moments
through
we
certain
each have,
stuff in life?
because no
I
2
learned
people's
shit. We all go
experiences
through
are
the
exactly
same shit.
alike, even when we're in
Years we
similar
in the military.
situations.
I did 4 years.
You might think of it like this.
Yeah.
Peaks and valleys are not just the good and bad times that happen to you. They are also how you feel inside and respond to outside events. How you feel depends largely on how you view your situation. The key is to separate what happens to you from how good and valuable you feel you are as a person." The old man continued, "I found that you can feel good about yourself even when bad things are happening to..." Suddenly, the young man interrupted him. "So, you're saying that when things down the valley weren't working out for me, I somehow should have been happy? Hate to disagree with you, sir, but I do.
I was listening
Nothing
to
was working
these
out for
type
me
of
down
books when I
there.
was going through like my
It's
broke
easy for you to
days
say all this sitting
in
up here on this
2019.
peak.
I was listening to
Your
stuff
life up here
like this
doesn't
that
have
was
anything to
helping
do
me
with my
stay
life down in the
positive
valley.
about like not
It's a whole
having
other world where I come
the
from."
income I wanted.
The old
Like,
man did not seem offended by the young man's
when
outburst.
I was chasing, went on my spiritual awakening journey 2018. Like that was like the first stage, and it was like how everything is bliss and all the honeymoon stage. Then in 2019, it was like I went through that dark stage where like shit on the outside wasn't going right, but everything on the inside was going right. Meaning like I was reading more books that was helping to enhance my way of thinking. I was talking on my podcast more, like I was creating more like content, or I was trying, but like the income and the money wasn't coming in. Like so, 2019, like the reading books like Peaks and Valleys, like that was very important for me, like because that kept me positive on a positive route. Especially listening to Nipsey Hussle, like in 2019, uh, Mailbox Money. That was like the theme song for the, not the song, theme album, theme mixtape for my life. That helped me get through a lot of shit. Like so, especially Killer, Miracle, Overtime. Like those are my favorite tracks on that. Like so, definitely a Nipsey fan.
He just stayed quiet. After a time, the young man grew calmer. He became embarrassed and said, "I'm sorry. I knew I was discouraged, but I guess I'm also a little angry, more than I realized." The old man nodded. "I understand." Then he said, "So, you think my life up here has no connection with your life down in the valley? Let me ask you something. Did you notice a gap on your way up here? A large hole in the ground that separated your valley from this peak?" "No, I didn't," said the young man. "Where was it?" The old man said nothing. The young man thought, and then laughed. "That's because there wasn't one, was there?" "Very good," the old man said. "Because peaks and
Exactly. Long
valleys
live
are
Nip
connected,"
Hussle.
the young man said. "How observant," the old man said with a
Shit,
smile.
I applied that
"Who is to
concept.
say
I
where the
applied the marathon concept to YouTube. Like shit, I'm gonna do this shit every single day and like just see what the end results is. And the end results is when I check out. Like so, fuck it. Like if you see me on YouTube every single day, is because I made it my job. Like literally, I made it my job to be on here, get monetized, like and spread information, give game. Like so, I'm not trying to be no famous celebrity. Like all I just need is the message. It hit who it needs to hit. That's all that matters. Like so, hey. And then once again, these is books that changed my life. Like so, if I know I read up this book and it changed my life, if somebody else read it, it could change their life too. So shit. Nipsey Hussle was a big, huge book reader. Like that's what another thing like that made me a big fan of him because like we was both book readers. So like Contagious, that it sparked the idea of starting a book club and like getting on live and like doing that 23-hour live where I just had the 48 Laws of Power playing. Like that was like a marathon live for me. Like shit, I ain't seen nobody do no 24-hour live, or it was 23 hours and like 20 something minutes. But damn near I hopped on live like a couple hours later, like and did another book. Like so, the marathon continues. Like that just motivates me. Just 25 no 8. I mean I said 25 no 8, but 25 8 no breaks. Like just keep going. It is like shit. I want to play
This
that one,
part
but I
of the
don't know if
valley
I'm gonna get.
ends,
I don't
and the
know if that's
lowest
a
part of the peak
copywritten one. So
begins. The
I'll
key
try.
is to understand not only that both physical
It don't
peaks
hurt
and
to get a
valleys
copyright
and
claim.
personal
Like
peaks and
shit,
valleys
that
are
don't strike
connected,
your video.
but also how they are connected.
Life is
Then
strange
he
and this is
expanded on what
marathon.
he had said.
Exactly. But I kind of
Peaks and
figured my
valleys
life
are
out. That's
connected.
what it's about.
The
Life
air
is
is humid.
strange, but it's only about figuring out your life. You don't have to figure out the world and what's going on the outside. Only thing you gotta figure out is self. Once you figure that out, everything is gonna work in your favor. The world, it seems like the secrets to life will start to reveal themselves. Like so, I had to focus on myself and nothing but myself. Like to build me up to this way. Like so, to even have this confidence to get on camera because a lot of people like they subconsciously don't like how they look. So when they get on camera, like they feel like other people's talking about them, laughing about them. Like so, I grew up in a hood where kids joked on my teeth. Like, so for the longest, I wasn't trying to get on camera because that was stuck in my head like, as a child. But I had to heal that childhood. That's childhood trauma I had to heal. Like, so I got over it. Now I'm like since I've been on YouTube for years straight watching other people's videos, I need to be able to dedicate being on YouTube for years straight. Like, so this is like a 10-year journey, and this is just the beginning. We in the first months. Like, and like this is my 10-year plan is to do this every single day, trying to find a different book. And as I grow, like people gonna want to write books and have me playing it on my channel because I'm gonna just be that big. I'm gonna get book deals. People want me to write my own book, like so. I understand like the thing. Like I'm thinking ahead, way ahead of time. My time. Like I know what's coming out because I see it. Like so, if you can see your future, but if you can imagine your future, if you can imagine everything you want in life, you can see your future. That's how you can predict your future. All you got to do is make the steps to take, like, to get there. And if you don't know how to get to where you want to go in life, look at the people who did, because there's always somebody who did what you're trying to do. Like so, Nipsey Hussle, luckily I was a fan of him because he gave the blueprint. At first, I was a fan of J. Cole, but he didn't get no blueprint like for me to be successful. Like he didn't motivate me in no business like way. Like so, Nipsey Hussle was a businessman, and when I started my own business, like I wasn't trying to listen to J. Cole because like his music didn't relate to me no more. Yeah. You appreciate it if I would do what? I be forgetting what I be saying sometimes. Like,
Good times create tomorrow's bad times. And the wise things you do in today's bad times create tomorrow's good times. For example, people who use a peaks and valleys approach during bad times make things better when they return to basics and concentrate on what matters most. The young man added, which is what creates good times for them later. Yes, the old man said. But then too many people fail to manage their good times and do not notice that they are creating their own future bad times. They waste too many resources, get away from the basics, and ignore what matters most. And guess what happens? The young
Nip
man
is
said,
definitely a role model.
bad
Like
times
shit.
again.
I mean, I don't have role models. I have like heroes. Like you said, like certain people are heroes. What? That was the last book. That wasn't this book. I'm gonna start getting confused because we gonna be listening to so many different books. I'm gonna be thinking like certain shit is this, but to be honest, what you started to just say random comments, so like kind of confused. But I know we was talking about role models like Nipsey, like that's a hero. Like the shit he was able to accomplish in life and what he was able to do, like shit, that's some superhero shit. Like what he overcame. Like, cause at the end of the day, we all gonna die. So it don't matter how you go, cause shit, fuck how the story ends. Like shit, we seen how Scarface died, but do we glorify the end? I mean, well, kinda, but still, it's about his lifestyle. It's about like that's why people did what they did because of that type of movie. Like shit, we always glorify the bad guy. Honestly, like shit, that's what this world was built off of: negativity, drama, killing, murder, drugs. Like crazy. Hey, shout out to that for that subscribe. Definitely appreciate it. Just trying to get my watch time hours up. Like so, that's what's making me be on live every day. And even after I get monetized, I'm gonna still be on here every single day. Cause I got to. Cause if I get on to watch somebody else's video, like I gotta I gotta put that same time in being on camera. Like so, like I said, this is a year's thing. And if I don't get killed, like no time soon, we gonna be here for a while. Like so, if you subscribe now, this is still the beginning of like my YouTube. journey because I'm telling you, we got a long way to go. It's gonna be full of peaks and valleys. Like we listen to these books, we're gonna be able to go back and listen to some of these books and see the things I said and what manifested and what came into fruition. Like so, basically, I'm making a library for YouTube. Like, I'm gonna just have all the best books, like to expand your mindset, like just to teach, give you game. Like it's gonna be the library. Be able to go to Positive Minds only for anything, just like
The young man
Amazon
had to
was.
admit this made sense. So we actually create our own good and bad times,
Hey,
far more than we
who was
realize.
just thinking? Hey, he makes sense. It was. I know somebody was thinking because he just said that. Like somebody just had a synchronicity at that moment. I bet you did. Question is you gonna like that was me?
Exactly, the old man exclaimed. His eyes brightened as he observed the young man starting to make his own discoveries. Perhaps that's enough to think about for one night, the old man said. If you like, we can talk tomorrow. I would like that very much. Then the old man said goodnight and left the young man to set up his tent and make camp. Later, the young man fell asleep thinking about how his own personal peaks and valleys might be connected. Early the next morning, the old man arrived carrying a thermos of hot coffee to share. In the bright morning light, the young man noticed how clear the old man's eyes were and said, "You seem happy. Is that because you always get to stay up here on this peak?" "No, that's not why I'm happy. And I don't always get to stay here. I have to go into the valley to get supplies and find what I need to live here." The young man was still sleepy and did not really grasp what the old man was saying. "I think I could be happy up here forever," he responded. "But you cannot," said the old man. "No one can stay in one place forever. Even if you remain physically in one spot, you are always moving in and out of the places in your heart. The secret is to truly appreciate and enjoy each time for what it is while you are living it." "I don't know about that," the young man said. "All I know is I am enjoying life just fine up here on this peak in this crisp, clean air. But how am I supposed to enjoy the time I spend in a valley?" "Actually," the old man said, "how you experience a valley has a lot to do with how long you'll remain in it. A useful way to think of peaks and valleys is this. Peaks are moments when you appreciate what you have. Valleys are moments when
For
you
sure, I
long for
got a
what is missing."
couple pieces
"Interesting,"
of
the
marathon
young man
clothing.
said. "But it seems to me that a
Yeah,
peak is a
it,
peak, no matter what I
this
think about
inspired
it.
me that much
And a
where it
valley..."
made me want to go buy his clothes. Like, he made me want to go to Cali, visit Crenshaw and Slauson. Like I did that. He made me want to like just go to Beverly Hills Mall. I mean, like the Beverly Center. Like he inspired me that much to walk in his footsteps. Like just for that inspiration. Like so, I definitely support. I'm gonna support that no matter what. Like so, hey, I'm in Vegas, so it's only a 4 hour drive. Like shit, I can always just take a trip out there. Like Cali got the best weed.
"The valley. What do my thoughts have to do with it?" the old man asked. "Do you
And
remember
you
the
live by
first thing you
Slauson.
said when you arrived on this
You
peak?"
know what I realized about
The young man tried.
I listened to Jay. I got Jay Stone album, a couple of his mixtapes, and I think I got his last album, last two albums I got. But what was I about to say? I was about to say how Slauson. I mean, how Hollywood. Not Hollywood. Fuck, talking about Hollywood. How when I went to Nipsey's hood, they considered that the hood. But it's nice houses. It's like you wouldn't. Like that don't look like the hood. Like I'm from Gary, Indiana. Like I can show you the hood. Like that's like abandoned houses. Like shit, lawns not cut. Like it looks like poverty. But when you go to L.A. and you visit these neighborhoods, you be like, wait, this the hood? It get y'all get down like that? Like y'all doing messing up these neighborhoods? Like, but it's crazy. Like, so I've been that way a few times.
but couldn't remember. You said, missed it. You focused on missing the sunset and did not see the stars. You did not even celebrate making it to the peak. How do you think you would have felt when you arrived up here? If you'd raised your arms over your head and shouted, yes, I made it.
I'm telling you, they
The young
don't
man
like
sighed.
shit.
So I changed my personal peak into a valley. I made it all the way up here to the place I dreamed of for years, but I still felt like I'd failed. The old man said, yes. Do you see? In that moment, you created a valley in your own mind. Then the old man asked, how could someone win a silver medal for outstanding performance and be unhappy? The young man thought about it and said, by comparing it to winning a gold medal. Then he realized, so if you want to have fewer valleys, avoid comparisons. It's instead. You cannot always control external events, but you can control your personal peaks and valleys by what you believe and what you do. The young man frowned. I'm not sure I understand. How would I do this? You said it would help me at work and in life. So I did. To change a valley into a peak, you need to change one of two things. What is happening, or how you feel about what is happening. If you can change the situation, that's great. If not, you can choose how you feel about it, so that it can work to your advantage. How? The young man asked. For example, imagine that you are the sole financial support for your family, and you have what you believe is a secure, well-paying job. And without warning, you learn that you have been fired, and you see no real chance for immediate employment. How do you feel? Frightened? Stunned? Angry? Understandable. That is how most people would feel. But what if you saw that leaving your job, although you didn't like getting fired, was one of the best things that ever happened to you? What if you realized later on that you and the job might not have been well suited for each other? And while you might never have chosen to leave at that moment, it may have been something you should have done long ago. What if you choose to believe that getting fired could result in something better? The young man said, but it could lead to something worse. The old man laughed. That's true. No one knows what's going to happen.
People always think the
However,
negative first,
in
don't they?
reality, choosing a better belief usually leads you to a much better result. The still skeptical young man asked, but how is that practical for a person who is now out of work? They may feel better about the situation, but they still need a job. You can't feed a family on good feelings. The old man said, fair enough. Okay.
Most people would have
Let's be
said I
truly
was
practical.
crazy. I'm pretty sure they did.
If you-
They just didn't say it to my face. But when I said I wasn't gonna work a 9 to 5, like we listened to Peaks and Valleys by Spencer Johnson. So this is one of the books that changed my life. Like I hate to keep pausing it, but like it was that impactful. Like it's bringing back memories to like shit when I was broke, going through shit, and I'm like, oh shit, I'm in a valley. I realized I was in a valley, and so I had to make the best of the situation. So, like this book was super helpful. Definitely, it's a short read too. Like it's
One
only
hiring a new
two and a
employee.
half hour audio
Who would you
book,
be
so
more
it
likely to
ain't
hire?
that long.
Someone who looked downtrodden and spent the interview complaining about how badly their former employer treated them? Or the person who looked for the good in the bad time and felt free to pursue a new opportunity and find something better? The young man said, the positive person, because they're more likely to do a better job. The old man said, and that's why the person with the better belief usually gets a better job. So what happened to that person's valley? The young man was amazed. It changed into a peak. So what the person believed and did actually made a difference. Maybe this really is practical. Yes, it's very practical, the old man said. Sometimes it's as simple as this. The path out of the valley appears when you choose to see things differently. By this time, the temperature on the mountaintop had dropped, and a few snowflakes had begun to fall. The old man asked, "Are you prepared to stay on the peak?" The young man admitted he had not brought warm clothes. "I guess I was in such a hurry to get out of the valley, I wasn't really thinking about what I'd need to stay up here." The old man said, "That's not unusual. Many people don't realize that they need to be truly prepared if they want to stay on a peak longer." The young man didn't understand that the old man was referring to managing your good times. "I hope you come back up again," the old man added. "I've enjoyed your visit." With that, he shook the young man's hand and said goodbye. The young man was disappointed to leave the peak, but encouraged by what he had found there. He told himself that he would now see his work and life differently. He hoped he would see a valley as an opportunity to discover the hidden good that makes things better. He took a deep breath of fresh mountain air, and he hoped he would be able to keep his clarity when he was back in his valley. He made a mental note of what he wanted to remember. You change your valley into a peak when you find and use the good that is hidden in the bad time. Chapter 3. Forgetting. When the young man arrived back in his valley, he recalled how he used to stand in the meadow and look up at the distant peak and dream about finding a different way
Y'all
of
really
life
listen
up
to
there.
it. Y'all getting game out
And
of
he
the
felt a
like
flush of
just these
excitement.
first couple
He
of
had
minutes.
actually ascended the peak, and just as he had hoped, he had gained a better view. Now,
First
he was
30
eager
minutes.
to return to his job with his new outlook. He wondered what his parents and friends would think when he told them all about his adventure. As he headed for home, he thought, "The view from this valley is so much smaller. The view from atop the peak where I've been, it's so much easier to see the big picture." He was very pleased with himself. He thought about a special young woman who he cared about, and hoped she would be impressed with his journey and his newfound knowledge. When he reached his home, he told his parents about his journey up the mountain and what he had learned from the old man who lived there. With this new philosophy, he told them, he would become a great asset at work and would no doubt soon be in line for a promotion. His parents looked at each other, thinking this sounded boastful, but they said nothing. The young man, however, was not as sure about all this as he sounded. He wondered if this new outlook would really make such a big difference.
You gotta really have
Secretly,
faith. You can't be
he still had
down
his
on
doubts,
yourself.
but he was eager to try it out and see. Soon he proudly told some of his friends about what he'd learned on the peak. Some were fascinated, while others were skeptical. It sounded so simple. Could it really work? But like most good friends, they wanted him to succeed. He also told the young woman he cared about. She was intrigued with his story and glad to see how excited he seemed. She hoped his newfound enthusiasm would last. When he went back to work, he was happy. Business was good at his company. Sales were increasing, and profits were at an all-time high. Then one day, a very important shipment got lost, and no one could find it. Their largest customer was so unhappy that they threatened to cancel their account. Everyone at work tried frantically to fix the problem. Some worked on making up the shortfall, while others focused on tracking down the missing shipment. But the company had grown too fast, and people were stretched too thin. Despite their efforts,
What's
other
up,
shipments were also
Brian?
lost. Many customers began canceling orders.
You got a question? What's the 6 for?
The mood at work was bleak. The young man remembered what the old man had said about getting out of a valley. You can change your valley into a peak when you find and use the good that is hidden in the bad time. That night, he kept thinking about it. The next day, he went to his boss with an idea. What if they used this crisis as an opportunity to find the weaknesses in their order tracking system and use what they found to create a better, more reliable system for future orders? His boss liked the idea and asked him to lead a team to make it happen. After several days, the team found key flaws in their system that led them to develop a much more reliable and less
Why just
expensive way
gave
of
me this
handling
zero
orders.
Gatorade?
They apologized to their customers,
Shit ain't
who
got
were
no
glad to
fucking
learn about the
taste.
better delivery system that was now available, and at a lower cost. Many began to reorder, small orders at first, but there was hope that larger orders would soon follow. Word got around that the new order system had been the work of a bright young man's team. His reputation improved among his co-workers, and his boss was so pleased, he gave him a raise. Before long, he went to his boss with another suggestion. Why not invest in growing new markets they'd never gone into before? But his boss said no. He felt they were doing fine as they were, and he reminded the young man that he was still the youngest manager, and he had just received a raise.
He trying to change he trying to take his job.
The young man realized that his boss, like many others in the company, was satisfied with things as they were. Many more things began to go wrong, both outside and inside the company, but no one seemed to notice. Most people in the company continued to act as if they were still in good times. As the business had grown, people had lost track of what made them successful in the first place. Many departments overspent,
Went to the mountaintop once and came back enlightened, tried to change everything. That's how it was when I first kind of woke up too.
Larger problems began to plague the company.
But that's when I said,
Income
fuck a
dropped
job.
substantially.
I should have been like kept a job so I could have stacked more money.
Including some of the young man's
fuck
friends.
That shit. I ain't trying to work for
Times were
nobody.
becoming bad. At least the young man was able to keep his position and was well regarded, since he had helped with his team's more efficient order and delivery system. He had even proudly told his parents how well he was doing at work.
In 2019, it got so bad. Like, I was, like, donating plasma, saying, like, man, I ain't trying to work no job. I'm going to try to stick it out. Like, I'm going to try to figure it out. I'm trying to build this business up. I thought my podcast was going to take off. I thought I was going to get, like, $1 million deal, like, with Spotify or something like that. That's what I was trying to manifest. But at the same time, I was hoping it happened overnight. And it didn't work like that. So, like, shit, I just kept grinding. Like, I wasn't even that consistent on my podcast, though. Like, the most consistent I ever got was, like, probably I posted 13 weeks straight, like, once a week. So, 13 podcast episodes straight was the longest I had ever did. Now, this is the longest I've ever been consistent with anything except school and a job. Like, that's what a job taught me. Like, that had me going to work every single day on time. Like, so I had to apply what I remember as being a worker, like just a regular worker, to like my lifestyle as now being like an entrepreneur. Like, when I can wake up whenever I want to, or I can just slack off and take a nap whenever I want to. Now I'm building up these habits as if I was working again like a regular job. So YouTube is like bringing that to me. Like, so my whole goal is to make millions off this shit. So my main IG, like, that got hacked. That was at 27K. So I kind of stopped focusing on Instagram, but I do got my Positive Minds Only YouTube. My Positive Minds Only IG. So it's positive_minds_only. Like, so I don't really be posting on. I be posting on the reels and stuff, but like, I don't really be truly focused on Instagram no more like that. Once my shit got hacked, I'm like, fuck this shit. Let me focus on YouTube. Man. YouTube been working out pretty well. So
long, he got caught up in his own
that was
success,
one of those peaks and valleys
and became
moments.
so confident that he stopped listening to anyone but himself. Over time, he forgot to use much of what he had learned on the peak.
That boy need to go back
Without
up there.
realizing it, he began to alienate the people around him. His coworkers started avoiding him.
I do be following back
and
too.
His boss began criticizing him. His newfound confidence soon began to fade.
Be on there like that.
Things at work were clearly going wrong, but he could not figure out why. When his parents tried to talk with him, he didn't listen. He just defended his behavior, which only
He
made
thought he
things
had all
worse.
the knowledge in the world
As
after
time
one
went
trip
on,
up the
the
mountain.
young man
Like,
found himself
bro.
back in a deeper valley. Then he recalled a piece of advice the old man gave him before he had returned to his valley. Between peaks, there are
I
always
feel you on
valleys.
that.
How you manage your
Your
valley
mind counts too.
determines how soon you reach your next peak. He wondered, how exactly do you manage a valley? If the old man had talked about that, he couldn't recall what he'd said. He went looking for his friends, but nobody seemed to be around. He did not realize it, of course, but his friends were avoiding him. He had not heard from the
That
young
happened to
woman in
me
quite
too.
a while, and wondered why. She's probably just busy, he told himself. Before long, he felt even lonelier than he had been before he'd gone to the peak. He reminded himself that it is natural to have peaks and valleys. He tried to find a path out of his valley by choosing to see things differently. He tried to find the hidden good in the situation and see how he could use it to his advantage. But nothing made him feel any better. Initially, the peaks and valleys approach had helped him become more successful. But now it wasn't working, and he couldn't understand why. He went back to the meadow again and
That's
looked
how
up
it
at the
was when I
mountain.
learned about the law of
The
attraction.
peaks and valleys approached sounded
I was
good when the old man.
manifesting like a lot of small shit. So I'm like, oh, this shit gonna work like this forever. It didn't work like that no more. After kept learning and kept growing and evolving, like the things that worked last year don't work for this year. Especially when you keep growing like shit. You can't keep doing the same thing, especially if it's not working or you're not consistent and procrastinating. So me, like I'm always trying to evolve and grow, and not trying to stay stuck in the same area. So
It. But here in the real world, it was starting to seem like it was nothing but a fairy tale that was too good to last. Maybe his doubting friends were right. He went off to think and rested for a while beside a quiet pond. Looking down, he caught a glimpse of his reflection. He did not like what he saw. He knew he was becoming more resentful and was not at peace with himself. Then he remembered something else the old man had said. If you do not learn in a valley, you can become
hey, that's
bitter.
why you're here.
If you truly
You learn
learn
the
something
same
valuable,
thing.
you can become better. But if that was true, what was it that he needed to learn? After many weeks, the young man got tired of trying to figure it all out. A few of his friends suggested that he join them out on the plateau, where they liked to go and dull out, as they called it. He had never been to the plateau, but from what he had heard, it wasn't that hard to get to. It certainly wasn't as far away as the peak. And being dulled out on the plateau had to be better than feeling low in the valley. So he set out for the plateau.
What most people go through, what I went through, when he went up his first peak, like, and he came back down, he thought he was the man. He thought he was better than everybody. Well, I ain't technically feel like I was better than everybody, but when I first got to Vegas, like my Instagram was shooting up to like 36,000, 34,000. Like I thought I was the man. Like shit, I was man. I can't even explain it. But when I got back down to my valley in 2019, like everybody stopped fucking with me. My views started going like not my views, but my likes started going down. My followers started lose. I started losing followers on Instagram. Like so, but I just stayed focused. I knew I was in a valley, so I'm like, if this ain't gonna last forever. So as long as I just keep pressing forward, I'll get out of here, out of this situation, and eventually I did. Like so. Now when I go through a valley, it's truly not a valley, and even my peaks ain't really a peak because I'm like always like just making sure I'm in the present moment, and that's what this is all about. Like just always staying in the present moment, enjoying where you at, learning. Like you can learn from your valleys just as well as your peaks. So
Chapter 4. Resting. The young man was surprised to see how barren it was on the plateau. There were no trees, and it was flat as far as the eye could see. The tepid weather was neither as warm as the valley, nor as cool as
Oh
the
my
peak.
gosh, this shit is
An overcast
nasty.
sky blocked the sun.
This great
It was almost
Gatorade
as though there
Zero.
was no
This
weather
shit
at
is
all.
fucking trifling.
At times, he saw other people in the distance, but he avoided them. He wanted to be alone. At first, he was relieved to feel little or nothing. He was glad he had come to the plateau. He soon began to recover from the stress of all the ups and downs he had been feeling. He liked just being where he was. It felt restful. Later on, he was glad to find his friends, but they did not seem enthusiastic about seeing him. Their eyes were as flat and lifeless as
They
the
just promoting
surroundings.
zero sugar
They
like
did not
that
seem
shit
interested in
good
what was
or
going on
something.
around them. They did not look healthy or vibrant, even in the outdoors.
Now that I
The young man
noticed
looked at
this,
his friends.
noticed that my wife been buying zero sugar stuff a lot lately, and I understand why, but the shit is nasty though. Like she bought some zero sugar Mountain Dew, like it's a new kind too. And I'm like, I ain't even been drinking that. Like that's how she's been stopping me from drinking pop, is by it being zero sugar. Like I'm not gonna drink no fucking pop that fucking tastes nasty. Like so I've been drinking a lot of water lately. But this Gatorade, like you at least could have let me have like the regular Gatorade. Cause this motherfucker trifling.
Wondered if he was starting to look like that too. He was afraid he
I'ma
might
drink
be.
it though. I ain't gonna waste it
The
because
young
I
man
understand
became bored
the
and
importance
restless.
of staying
When he had
hydrated.
first arrived on the
So I ain't gonna
plateau,
waste it.
it was refreshing to take a break from everything.
This shit
Now it
fucking-
felt like everything was starting to drain from him. He was not
You knew this shit was
enthusiastic,
nasty.
like he once felt on the peak.
You gonna give it to me in the dark
When he had
too,
been in the
like, so I
valley,
wouldn't see what
It
it
seemed
was.
like a good idea to go to the plateau. But
That's
now
the
he
second
wondered
time
why
you
he
gave me
was still
something
there.
nasty to drink today.
A
That
plateau, he
fruit punch
thought,
first, and now
was a
this
neutral
shit.
time when you felt neither high nor low. So what was
I'm
this
sure,
plateau
but
for
it's
him?
the only thing I got to
Was he
drink
just
right
taking
now.
a well-deserved break and resting? Or was he here to escape? And if so,
Sometimes you gotta
what
drink
was
the
he
shit
escaping
fast so
from?
you don't taste it.
And what
That's
about
what
his
I'm gonna do with
friends?
that. Like just
Were they just
gulp
trying
that
to
shit
escape
down.
reality by dulling their senses? Eventually, he said goodbye to the others and went off on his own. The young man could barely see the peak from where he was.
You
He
should
looked up
try it.
and thought about what the old man might be doing now. He remembered looking into the old man's face and seeing the brightness and clarity in his eyes. A part of him wished he was back there. The clarity he found on the peak was certainly different than the dullness he felt on the plateau. Then he looked up at the peak again and felt the same urge he had felt so many times before. He wanted something better. But he was not sure he was willing to climb up to the peak again. He might only be disappointed once more when he had to return to the valley. That night, he slept poorly and wondered again if he should bother
Shit
trying.
tastes like fucking medicine.
But he awoke the next morning thinking about the peak.
Drunk it
The
though.
more he thought about it, the
Yeah.
more he wanted to return to the old man and
I'm gonna
ask
pour
him
all
why
them
the peaks
bitches
and
out.
valleys
I'm gonna
approach
get that
had
shit to
only
the
worked
kids.
for a little while.
I'm like, can I have something to drink? Yeah,
Eventually,
get them
he
zero
left the
sugar
plateau and
Gatorades
returned
and
to his
drink
valley.
that shit up.
Over the next several days, he made
You
plans
be
to
pouring
return
that
to
shit
the
out
peak.
and just sink your shit.
This time, he hoped he would be better prepared for what the peak might hold for him. Chapter 5. Learning. The journey back up the mountain was difficult, and the young man was exhausted by the time he reached the peak. Still, he arrived in time to enjoy a beautiful sunset. This time, he was invited to the old man's mountain home. He was surprised by its size and marveled at the superb craftsmanship. Then the two men went out and sat on a huge deck overlooking a beautiful lake. The young man said, "I can't tell you how happy I am to be back on this peak again." The old man was pleased to see him, but he saw he was troubled and asked why. The young man said, "When I returned to my valley, I tried to use what you shared with me, like finding the good that is hidden in the bad time. It worked at first, but then things turned worse. I got discouraged and went off to spend time on a plateau.
Cause
But
he
that didn't
don't
work so well.
realize he was being a
Was it a
fucking
healthy
dick.
or unhealthy experience for you?"
When he
The-
came back, he thought he knew everything. Like that's kind of how I was. Like I said, when I first woke up, I was trying to wake everybody else up. That shit, it didn't work like that. So, like, he don't realize the way he was acting Like when he came back down to the valley off his peak, like he was just trying to guide everybody, trying to give everybody opinion, I mean advice and shit. Like and knowing damn well that was only one mountain you can climb, one hill you can climb. There's other fucking there's other shit. I mean, let me stop trying to tell the book.
Next. I don't understand, the young man said. The old man responded, have you ever seen something like this? The old man began to draw. The young man said, that looks like a tracing of a heartbeat. What do the ups and downs remind you of? They look like peaks and valleys. Yes. But what would this mean? This time he drew a straight line. The young man said, I think that would mean that there is no heartbeat at all. Yes. A problem. Like a healthy heartbeat, your personal peaks and valleys are an essential part of a normal, healthy life. So are the plateaus. If they are times of healthy rest, when you take stock of what is happening and pause to think about what to do next. While it is unhealthy to try to escape by blocking out reality, it can often be very healthy to just relax and rest and trust that things will get better. Because after a good night's sleep or a few days' break, they often do. This time the young man had come prepared with a small notebook to record what he was discovering on the peak. He wrote, a plateau can be a time for you to rest, reflect, and renew. The young man said, my time on the plateau may have been unhealthy at first, but in the end it was good for me. I thought I had just given up when I went there, but afterward, I went back to my valley more rested and with a greater interest in coming back to this peak. Still, he wondered, how can it be healthy to have ups and downs? How can that be peaceful? Don't all the highs and lows make you feel anxious and stressed out? The old man answered, only if you go up and down with them. Once you truly learn to manage your good and bad times, you gain a sense of healthy balance. But how? The young man asked. To begin with, you become more peaceful once you realize that you are not your peaks, your good times, and you are not your valleys, your bad times. Then, you will no longer feel like you are on an emotional roller coaster. The young man thought about that as they both looked quietly at the sunset. Then the old man asked, what happened when you first went back to your valley? The young man said, the peaks and valleys approach seemed to be working for me. I had some real success at work. But then things went wrong, and I have no idea why. The old man offered, there was another reason I showed you the heart tracing. It was to encourage you to use the peaks and valleys approach with your heart. What do you mean? It is not only the valuable insights you gain on the peak that are important. It is also how you feel about the insights and what you do with them that makes all the difference. For example, how do you behave when you are down in the valley? How do I behave? The young man asked. Yes. And when you returned to your valley, how did you feel? I felt good. It was one good time. The old man said nothing. What? The young man said. But the old man just waited. The young man realized what he had just said and had a thought. Oh, that's
My
it, isn't it?
cuz watching
The
you
good time
live. Shout
didn't
out to
last because
listen.
of how I felt
I
and
need
what
to.
I did then.
Hey,
The old man
speaking of
said,
shrooms,
very good.
my shroom plug called me today, like randomly, and it was by accident. He wasn't even on the phone. I picked up and it was like nothing. So I'm like, damn, like that's letting me know, like I need to get my shroom, get some more shrooms. I'm gonna drink Cool Blue Gatorade. I fuck with the Cool Blue Gatorades. Uh, the fucking yellow ones is trifling. I fuck with the orange Gatorades. The fucking strawberry. You know which ones that a sleeper? The fucking cucumber ones. Like my wife hate them, but them be smack when they super cold. Like if they kind of hot, then they trash. But if they super cold, them is pretty good. Oh yeah, I do shroom. Not that often though. Like I don't. Like I try to like separate like space the time before I like do shrooms. I be fucking sometimes I be tripping hard. But I was gonna do shrooms while I was listening to a book, like some shit. Fuck it. If I can find, I had some in the freezer. I think my wife probably threw them away or something because I can't find them. But yeah, I fuck with the shrooms. It's, we don't do
Mercy was
Turkish.
not the
It's
good
all
time
natural over here.
self, but how you
Mushrooms
did
worth
not
the
manage
trouble.
things
Doesn't
well
really
during
make you
that
feel.
good time.
Yes.
It may be helpful to think.
Yes. If you was like, you probably wasn't here in live when I did. We were listening to the book, The Celestine Prophecy, but he was talking. That was another book like this one. It was like a story book, but it had a lot of meaning and messages in it. He was talking about how he became one with just nature, trees, and everything. Like so, when I was on shrooms, last time I did shrooms, I did it with shroom tea. Like I wouldn't suggest that way. And like if you was gonna do shrooms, I suggest you do it with some other like-minded individuals, or like do it. I mean, you something you gotta prepare for. Like I wouldn't just say like just hop off and do it. Like I've been like doing fucking with psychedelics since 2019. So and I did LSD twice, then I did shrooms probably like 3 times. So, but I had some edibles that like gave me the same feelings as psychedelics too. So, but anything that expand my mind, like shit, I fuck with it. I want to try some ayahuasca too. So,
This way, you can have fewer bad times when you appreciate and manage your good times wisely. The young man thought about this for a moment and said, "But I don't see what I did wrong. How did I manage my good times poorly?" The old man said, "When you were feeling so good, did you perhaps boast a little about what you had discovered here on the peak?" The young man said nothing. "Do you think that may have happened?" "I don't think so."
boy,
Maybe.
man.
The old man waited. The young man
What's
sighed.
up, Kane? You
You
fuck
know,
with the shrooms?
that might explain why my friend's been avoiding me lately. He was thinking especially about the
Hey,
special young woman.
I always,
Then he said,
man.
"The first time I did..."
I always recommend people try like psychedelics at least once, because you're gonna have an experience, especially if you're like an individual who's uh, conscious. Like it's best for you. Like if you a dumbass, I wouldn't. I recommend you do them fucking rapper drugs or some shit. But psychedelics is for like people who trying to expand their consciousness. Like so, that's what I'm into. I got the plug. Hey, if you got the plug for him, like
this peak,
might
you
as well
said
go
most
ahead
people
and try
don't
'em.
realize
That's the
they
reason
need
you
to
got
be
a plug
truly
for 'em.
prepared if they want to stay on a peak. The old man smiled. "I'm glad you remember that. Those who are unprepared for a peak soon fall from it, and they experience pain." "How do you truly prepare to stay on a peak?" asked the young man. The old man said, "Instead of giving you my answers, perhaps I can help you find your own
You know,
answers.
for sure.
When
Hey,
things started going wrong
you
for
get
you,
yours, I'm gonna get
how
mine.
did you feel?" "Awful," replied the young man. "So why didn't you change your behavior?" "I don't know," the young man admitted. "Maybe because I didn't know how to deal with it. Or I thought if I just ignored it, things would somehow get better. Or maybe I was afraid to admit I'd been wrong, or that I needed help." "And what would all these reasons have in common?" the old
For
man
real,
asked.
like shit. I be
The
trying to
young man
space them
thought
out
for a
because
moment and said,
sometimes I done had a few bad trips. I ain't even gonna lie. Like all my trips ain't just been cool. Like I done had some enlightening. Uh, I swear to God, we go for hours like this. Psychedelics, you got DMT where like the toe where Mike Tyson and Joe Rogan be talking about. That's like a 10-minute like trip, but it seemed like time is irrelevant, so it don't feel like 10 minutes. Motherfucking LSD and mushrooms, you'll be fucking going for hours, and you'll be seeing shit that you think is real. You'll be hearing things that you know is real, but it's not. Check my temperature. You good? Okay. My bye. Alright, so definitely I fuck with the shrooms.
"I'm not sure," he guessed. Fear? The old man nodded. Yes. And what is the source of a person's fear? The young man did not know. For most of us, it's ego, the old man said. Your ego can make you arrogant on the peak and fearful in the valley. It keeps you from seeing what is real. Your ego distorts the truth. When you are on a peak, your ego makes you see things as better than they really are. And when you are in a valley, your ego makes you see things as worse than they really are. It makes you think a peak will last forever, and it makes you fear a valley will never end. The young man wrote in his notebook what the old man went on to say. The most common reason you leave a peak too soon is arrogance, masquerading as confidence.
What's good?
The most common reason you stay in a valley too long is fear, masquerading as comfort. The young man wanted to know,
they the ones who fucking
how does arrogance
right
take
now.
you off a peak? The old man offered. Let me give you an example. When I was younger, I worked for a very large and famous company. We provided a great service at a good price, the best in our industry.
Hey, you gonna learn something
Then our
tonight.
costs rose,
Being on them
and the economy
shrooms and
took
in
a turn
this
for the
live,
worse.
watch, you're gonna have an
Our
epiphany.
service cost us more to provide,
Some
and
different
soon fewer
perspectives
people
gonna
could
come.
afford it.
Watch.
Sales fell, but due to our fame, management believed
So
they
family
could
definitely
simply
popping
ride
in the
out the
live
bad
tonight.
time.
Yeah, my brother
The
and
reality.
like my cousins that popped up in the live tonight. So hey, so shout out to my hey, that's the big cuz. Like I don't really too much give people respect for like for being who they is, but he's somebody who on their shit. So shout out to him. Like he be giving me different perspectives. Like he didn't took me to like LA a few times, and I'm like, damn, like okay, I know I need to up my shit, like, cause I be thinking like I know I got knowledge, I know I got wisdom, but like that 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 finances part, like that's what I'm working on, like so, and it ain't like I'm broke. It's just like I'm trying to get to like the next level, the millions and the billions, like shit. That's what we trying to focus on, like so. YouTube is another way to add extra income. Like, so I'm heavy about like just adding different sources of income, especially if I ain't got to work hard. Like right now, I don't consider this working hard because I'll be in my office right now on my phone just watching somebody else. So like just watching myself, that's way better because like ain't nobody programming me. I'm not hearing nobody else's opinions, thoughts. Ain't nobody making me think nothing. Or it's just these books we listening to and like whoever's coming in tuning in. Like so, I appreciate y'all definitely for like coming in because I've been doing this shit every single day. Hustling motivation, exactly. Like that's the thing for today. Hustle and motivate.
Of course, was that we needed to change. But they didn't see this because their arrogance had made them complacent. Eventually, we lost most of our customers and had to sell the business. So, what did you do? The young man asked. I asked myself, what is the truth in this situation? The truth was that we were not making our customers happy. And then I began asking myself,
Sound like my daughter here.
how can I be of more service? Before long, I left and started my own company. I made that question the cornerstone of building a new business. Even though we started small, our customers had a great experience with us, and they told others. Over the years, we grew into a big company ourselves. The young man asked what the name of his company was, and when the old man told him, he recognized it at once. He realized his new friend was a very wealthy man. Apparently, this peaks and valleys approach was really effective at work. But he wondered, was it as useful in life? He asked, can you tell me more about how it worked in your life? The old man thought for a moment, and then he said, yes, I'll share a personal example with you.
Hey, now that's my other cousin.
When my wife
So I
became
got two
increasingly
cousins. I don't know if my brother in
it
this one,
became
but
a
he came
deeper,
earlier.
deeper
So
valley for us.
that's how you know
She
you're
had
doing
always made
something right when
raising
your
our
family start
children,
watching.
running our home, and nurturing all of us seem effortless. It was hard for us to see her in so much pain.
Shout out
that
to
she
you,
couldn't do the things she
Fofo
used to
B-Dog,
enjoy.
for coming through.
I felt it was up to me to try
We're
and
gonna be
do
back
much of what
tomorrow
she
though, like
once
so.
did. So
Pretty sure
I
I'll see
struggled
you
to take
again.
care of her and our children, help run the home, and continue with my work. Soon I was stressed out. Of course, what I was really worried about was her well-being. I didn't know what to do. The old man's voice caught for a moment. As he remembered that dark time, the young man said quietly, "That must have been very difficult."
I know he was in the
It
first one.
was,
Damn, my
the
dog.
old man admitted.
Oh yeah,
I
for
became
sure.
afraid.
Definitely,
I was worried
definitely
about
feel
what
the
would
support.
happen. I knew that fear can chase away truth, so I asked myself, what is the truth of this situation? And the truth was simple. I loved her. Then I asked myself, what would be the most loving thing I could do right now? At first, I didn't know. But then I started doing whatever thoughtful things for her that I could
Doing
think
so
of.
much, pulling my shit.
And soon, the situation didn't seem like such a deep valley. Why was that?
You follow
The young man asked.
you follow me on TikTok.
Because I saw that my
What
wife
is my
realized how much
shit? I
I
think
loved
it's
her.
Mr. Perfect
It made her feel
0314.
better.
I
I
be
knew
on
I had not
TikTok.
been as thoughtful before as I could have been. Soon, I enjoyed the feeling that comes with becoming
It
a
took
better
me.
person.
I'm just Jinx.
The
My
old man.
little brother Jinx is the reason. Like he's the innovator for the family. He's the one who be always doing shit first. Like so, he been doing TikTok for a minute. Like, and he, like you would expect him to be doing. Like he's more serious than me. Like to a sense. So, like we had conversations about like just getting on TikTok and just like having fun because that's what it's about. At the end of the day, talking about the first one, how much? Hold on. I got you though. Like I'm gonna definitely follow. How many lives do we do in a day? Sometime like I probably did up to 2 lives in a day, but I come on live every single day. Like so, you gonna see me. Well, I'm gonna definitely I'm using my phone. I need to get another phone. That's what I'm working on. Like getting 2 phones so I can have a phone like this playing books all day, and then like one like I can use like to follow people back, whether on shit like that or like just different things. But right now I'm just using one phone and my computer. Like so, as we continue to grow and invest in ourselves, all money in, no money out, we gonna just continue to bring better content and shit. Listen to more books and grow. Put your TikTok. Oh shit! I gotta hope I put it right though. Yours is easy for me to remember. Like just, but I just gotta remember it's not 44. It's 89. Like, cause I'll be like, wait, which one was it? But
To my surprise, I began feeling more peaceful and successful, even in the terrible circumstances we found ourselves in. I realized that many of my fears were really about me, not about her. In looking for ways that I could be more loving, I shifted my focus from me to her. I managed to get outside myself. So, the young man realized, when you put your ego aside, you are more likely to leave a valley sooner. Exactly, the old man said. And putting your ego aside can also help you stay on a peak longer. The young man thought about how important that was. He hoped he would remember it. Later, he looked out into the distance and exclaimed, "Wow, look at that!" The old man smiled. He knew the young man would see it sooner or later. "Look at that great peak over there. It's even higher than this one," the young man said, as though the higher peak had just been discovered for the first time. "I'll bet the view from there is even better than it is from here." "No doubt it is," the old man agreed. "I've got to go see it," said the young man. But then he looked down and
are
saw
you
the deep
prepared to
valley
go see
that lay
that,
between
mom?
this peak and the higher peak. He groaned, knowing it might be hard to cross. The old man asked, "When you look at that valley, what do you see?" The young man thought for a moment and then laughed. Pain? The old man laughed as well. Many people see a deep valley that way. They
Alright,
see
so if you
valleys as
follow me, I'm
times
gonna
of
definitely be able
frustration,
to
hurt,
see that you follow me, and I'm gonna
disappointment,
definitely follow
anger,
back.
and failure. But remember what happens when you find and focus on the good that is hidden there. The young man nodded. You can change a valley into a peak. Yes, the old man said. But it takes a remarkable person to truly appreciate and use what lies hidden in a valley. Do you think you can? The young man took a deep breath. Thank you for reminding me of that. So, my challenge is to go through a valley in a different way, isn't it? So how do I do that? The old man said, I find the best way to get through a valley is by creating and following your own sensible vision. What does that mean? By sensible, I mean a vision of a future peak you want to be on that makes good sense to you. Something as big as you can imagine that is also realistic and attainable, if you want it enough. And sensible also means you can make what you imagine more real to you when you use all your 5 senses to create an image in such specific, believable detail that you begin to realize you can make it happen. Imagine how your future peak will look, sound, smell, taste, and feel until it becomes so real to you that the image of getting there pulls you through your valley. The young man sensed how powerful this could be. He wrote, a great way to get to your next peak is to follow your sensible vision. Imagine yourself enjoying your better future in such specific,
What I
believable
say,
detail
you know
that
how
you
to
soon
imagine
enjoy
your
doing
future.
what takes you there.
That's,
The two men
that's all
went
you
on
gotta
talking
do
well
to
into the
manifest some
evening.
shit. Be able to see
Later
it.
that night, the young man went to his tent and dreamed about getting to a better place. Early the next morning, he arose and gazed at the higher peak. Then he went to find the old man. He said that he hoped it would not take too long to get to the next peak. He looked forward to an even greater view from up there once he arrived. As they said their goodbyes, the old man made a suggestion. When you reach the higher peak, you might want to see if you can gain insights into deeper truths of your own. You might want to listen with your heart to your own thoughts and recall real moments in your work and life that will guide you to your own truths. What you discover will become your own wisdom, not mine or anyone else's.
That's what you
The young man said
gotta
he would remember
discover.
that, and
Like
he
on
thanked
my,
the old man.
that's why I follow. Not follow. That's why I study a lot, read a lot, but I don't follow nobody because I had to go find my own story, like my own shit, my own experience. I couldn't just be telling y'all what Nipsey Hussle said or what Napoleon Hill said. Like I should gotta give you my own real experience, something you can relate to. Like so, I've been through a lot of peaks and valleys so far, and like shit, as I continue to live and grow, I'm gonna go through plenty more. But shit, my peaks have now, like my valleys, they in peaks, they're all the same now. Not really the
Sharing so
same, but
much with him.
I've conquered
Then they shook hands,
being in
and the
my
young man
valleys.
set off to cross a deep valley in his attempt to reach the higher peak beyond. Chapter 6. Discovering. The young man trudged along through the unfamiliar valley. Driving rain stung his face. He looked for shelter, but found none. The journey was proving to be even harder than he'd expected. When he set out, the valley had not looked this deep. Why does it have to be this way? The young man muttered. Aren't we supposed to be happy in life? Why do we need valleys at all? His feet were soaked, and he felt chilled to the bone. He was
He
miserable.
should have looked down and seen
He
a
said
better
through
way to
clenched
like
teeth,
get to his destination.
one day I'll look back on this and laugh. He thought about what he'd said, then added, why wait until later? Why not laugh at it now? He laughed out loud and felt a little better. Then his laughter was answered by a loud clap of thunder. He looked up anxiously and hoped he would be safe from the lightning. His legs ached and his feet hurt from walking over sharp rocks. He remembered the old man saying, how you manage your valley determines how soon you reach your next peak. He didn't feel he was doing a very good job of managing this one. Finally, he reached the very lowest point of the valley and stopped. The rain had completely washed away the path. Ahead, he saw nothing but a narrow, roaring river that seemed impossible to cross. I can't, he said aloud. The current is too strong. I'll never make it. He felt defeated. He would have to turn around and go back the way he came. But how would he ever face the old man? How would he face himself? The young man sat down in the mud and stared at the river. He feared he might wade into the river and be pulled under by the powerful current. He imagined
You
swallowing
thinking
mouthfuls
too
of water
negative.
as he went under and drowned.
That's how
He
it be.
shuddered and asked
Shit.
himself,
When you want to do
why does
something,
being in a valley have to be so painful?
thoughts start telling you all the
And then
reason
he
why you
answered
can't
his
do
own
it.
question by
Then you
remembering
gotta
something the
overcome it.
old man had
And
said.
be like, fuck you. You
The
gotta tell
pain in a
yourself,
valley
fuck you
can wake you
sometimes.
up to a
And yourself will
truth
try to
you
stop
have
you.
been ignoring. So,
Plenty of times
what
I had to
truth was
cuss
he
myself
ignoring?
out because I was being a
He
little
looked up at
bitch.
the higher peak in the distance. All I know, he thought, is that I really wanted to be on that higher peak. He wondered if there was a mountain lake up there that was as beautiful as the one in front of the old man's house, or even more so. He wondered what the fresh air would feel like against his face. Then he thought about what the old man had said about getting to your next peak by creating and following a sensible vision, a picture of a better future that makes sense, and that you draw on all 5 of your senses to imagine.
Yes. Like that's
He
why
realized
that's
that
what
just
turned my
moments
channel
ago,
up.
he'd been
Listening to Nipsey Hussle's videos, interviews is really what turned my channel. Like using his clips from those interviews like as shorts. And that's what you can I know like shit. And basically, what he was saying on his interviews, like I was basically saying the same thing on my podcast, but it was in my own way. So I realized that wasn't getting as many views as Nipsey. So when I started posting his shit, like his fans started coming to my page. So I'm like, hey, now they see me and like, hopefully I gain a new subscriber off of it. But 14,000 subscribers, that ain't bad. Like at least for like 90 days of work.
a fearful vision, an image of himself drowning as he was being pulled into the river. The old man had never talked about a fearful vision, but that was exactly what the young man had been seeing. Maybe you are always creating a vision of your future, he thought, whether you are aware of it or not, either a fearful vision or a sensible vision. And it's just a question of which vision you follow. And then he said, "Oh, that's it." He spoke the words out loud into the rain and thunder around him. My valley is fear. He thought there were some kinds of valleys, from illness or loss of a loved one, to financial reversals and other misfortunes, that might be beyond his control, and were not caused by fear. But more important for him, he now also realized that he created many of his valleys with his fear, whether he saw it at the time or not. He wondered, since your valleys are moments of longing for what is missing, did he fear that he would never gain or regain what was missing? After all, he was still sitting in the mud at the bottom of a valley, but he had to admit he felt better when he moved beyond his fear. He knew he had often denied the reality that he might be responsible for some of his own valleys. He had certainly wished his peaks would last longer. Now, looking at his work and life, it seemed like they'd never lasted long enough. He also wished his valleys would not go on so long. Then he laughed. I wish I had a wishing well. Maybe I could toss a few lucky coins into it, and my wish to be on the other side of the river would come true. He laughed again, and felt better, knowing that it's good to be able to laugh at yourself. Then he remembered what the old man had been trying to tell him. He took out his pocket notebook and wrote, "Avoid believing things are better than they really are when you are on a peak, or worse than they really are when you are in a valley. Make reality your friend." He looked at the peak again and imagined how it would feel to stand up there in triumph. The old man had said that the most powerful tool to help you get through a valley and arrive at your next peak is to follow a sensible vision. So, he began to create a sensible vision of his own. He closed his eyes and imagined, in realistic and believable detail, that he was already on the higher peak. He saw the magnificent view. He felt the touch of the warm sun on him as he stood on the peak above the dark rain clouds. He tasted the water of the crystal clear lake. He smelled the tall pine trees and heard the cry of an eagle. He was unaware of any fear. He felt peaceful. He opened his eyes and looked back up at the peak, still imagining how good it would be to be up there. As he held on to his sensible vision, it seemed to pull him back up to his feet like a magnet. He looked across the river at a tree stump on the other side. A plan formed in his mind. He took out a rope from his backpack and made a lasso. Then he stood and threw it across the river, but it missed. He threw it again many times, but the rope got wet and heavy and became more difficult to toss. He sank back to his knees, closed his eyes, and felt the throbbing pain in his arms and back. He thought seriously about giving up. He looked back at the higher peak again and recalled his sensible vision. The young man looked across the river and focused on the tree stump as if nothing else existed. Still focusing, he threw the rope, and this time it looped snugly over the stump. He pulled on it several times to make sure it was secure. Then he entered the turbulent waters and slowly began pulling himself hand over hand to the far side. Twice, he was almost sucked under, but he hung on to the rope that he had secured on both sides of the river. It saved his life. Eventually, he reached the other side and slowly clambered up the riverbank. There he stood, raised both hands over his head, and yelled, "Yes!" He laughed. Even though he was still down in the valley, he felt like he was up on the peak. And all at once he understood what a personal peak could be. A personal peak is a triumph over fear. He sat down and grinned. It felt great to have overcome his fear. He decided to rest for a while before setting out for the higher peak. He wondered about the difference between wishing for a better future and following a sensible vision. Then he realized that the difference is in the doing. Wishing leads to no action, he thought. But when you truly follow a sensible vision, you want to do the things that make it happen. You don't force yourself. You just want to so much that you find yourself doing things you never knew you were capable of. He was beginning to understand what the old man meant by truly following your vision. It meant staying true to what you want and doing what really takes you there, recognizing the truth. More and more, he was starting to realize that fear blocks you, but the truth helps you succeed. He smiled and looked at the higher peak again. Soon he got up with renewed enthusiasm and continued his journey. He realized that once he had begun to follow his sensible vision, he had gained more energy and confidence. As he climbed higher, he stepped on patches of loose rock and slid back down again, but each time, he resumed his climb. He smiled as he made progress. He was on his way to a higher peak. After what seemed like a long time, he emerged into the sunlight and stood atop the mountain. He had come upon the most gorgeous lake, surrounded by great trees. He felt a fresh breeze. Then he turned to look back at the valley he'd been through. He knew how difficult it had been, but it made things even sweeter now. He thought about how things were back home in his own valley and recalled his old life and job. He thought about his parents and friends and the young woman he cared about. He remembered how fearful he had been, although a lot of times he hadn't realized it. He had been afraid his friends wouldn't like him, afraid his father wouldn't respect him, afraid the young woman he cared about would lose interest in him, afraid he would lose his job, afraid he would be viewed as a failure. He was probably afraid of other things too. He had been foolish to let fear run his life so often and cloud his view of the truth. At last, he felt he really was beginning to live the peaks and valleys philosophy. He thought of it as a philosophy with skills. It's a way of looking at things he thought. And just as important, it's a way of doing things. Make reality your friend, the old man had said. He felt he was beginning to grasp what that could mean for him. The pain he had felt in the valley did indeed wake him up to some truths he had been ignoring. He saw that when he not only faced the truth, but embraced the truth, it served him better. Then he exclaimed, "That's why the old man uses the word truly so often. He means based on the truth." He hoped he would now truly look for what was real, rather than live in illusion. He realized he could build a stronger foundation for the future if it was built on what was really true. What amazed him most was the power of creating and following his sensible vision. As the old man had predicted, when he followed his sensible vision, he came up with surprising ways to make it happen. He thought that following his sensible vision was like looking at a map. It was a practical way to help you get where you wanted to go. The vision he had held of the peak had not only dissolved the fears that undermined him, but it had also given him the clarity and strength to go on. "It's truly worth using again," he said with a smile. And he wrote what he felt was an important entry in his notebook. You create a peak when you truly follow your sensible vision. Your fear fades, and you become more peaceful and successful. He sat quietly and listened to the whisper of wind in the trees on the peak, and the gentle lapping of water at the lake's edge. It was as good as, or even better than, he had imagined it would be. The young man felt a sense of freedom he had never felt before. He hoped he could share this feeling with those he cared about. As he looked back toward his valley, he felt it would be good to get home again. But before that, he wanted to spend time again with the old man. He began to imagine in detail what it would be like to be with the old man on his peak once more. How lucky he was to have made changes in his life while he was still young. You didn't have to be old to gain wisdom, he realized. Then, looking down over the valley, he spotted a shortcut he hadn't seen before. He thought, it's amazing how much more you can see from a higher point of view. I guess the key is, when you're in a valley, to imagine seeing what you might see if you were on a peak. He liked the possibility of making discoveries in the valley, so that his next valley would be less painful, maybe even beneficial. He planned to take the shortcut on his journey back to see the old man. Now that I know a better way, he thought, the time in the valley will not be so painful. He couldn't wait to see his old friend again. Chapter 7. Sharing. The young man reached the summit in the early afternoon. As soon as he saw the old man, he ran over and embraced him. The old man laughed. That's quite a greeting. I hardly recognized you. You don't look at all like the young fellow who turned up here that first evening. It is quite a journey, isn't it? Yes, it is, the young man said.
Y'all see my dog
It took me a
in the
good
gym.
deal longer than I thought it would to get to that higher peak.
I'm trying to get down there.
Life is quite a journey. Ah, the young man said. Yes, it certainly is. Then he told him about what he had done since he'd left. The old man asked, so, what do you feel are the most important things you have discovered? Well, the young man said, I've learned that it is not enough to simply know about peaks and valleys in your head
Why you
and talk
go down
about it,
for?
as I did when I went back to my valley the first time. You need to live the peaks and valleys philosophy, and the more you do, the more you learn and grow, and the more calm and successful you become. I've also learned that both the good and bad times in my life are truly gifts, and that each has great value if I manage them well. When I was on my own, up on the higher peak, I spent a lot of time looking at the truth, as best I could. Now I'm really looking forward to seeing my friends and family again. I realize I have so much I can learn from them too. The old man smiled. I see that you've also learned something else. What do you mean? The old man said, you've learned some humility. I'm glad you have, because now you are more likely to remain on your peaks longer. The young man just grinned. The old man said, Do you remember telling me when we first met how unhappy you felt living in your valley? And how nothing seemed to be working for you there? Yes, the young man said, a little embarrassed. That was because I did not appreciate that my valley was an opportunity for me to grow, to create something better in my life. I was just trying to escape my valley, not learn from it. He added, I see now that when I get outside myself and look for the gift hidden in that valley, it can bring me to a new and better place. The young man thought further and added, I don't know if this is right, but it seems to me that the purpose of the peak is to celebrate life, and the purpose of the valley is to learn about life. The old man smiled. That's good. From the clarity in your eyes, I see you've discovered quite a bit about the truths of peaks and valleys. The young man said, You can see all that? The old man laughed. It's not that hard to see. Tell me, what was it like when you reached the bottom of the valley? It is a very deep valley indeed. The young man looked down for a moment, remembering what had happened. I came up against this roaring river that looked too dangerous to cross. I was turned around and came back, he said. I feared I would fail, but then I remembered that it's our fear that keeps us trapped. More important, I discovered that I really can change a valley into a peak by letting go of my fear and getting outside of myself. How? The old man was intrigued. What did you do? I remembered that a great way to get to my next peak is to create and follow my sensible vision, one that makes sense to me and is realistic and attainable if I want it enough. I used all 5 of my senses to imagine that I was already enjoying being on the higher peak. I imagined what I would see, touch, taste, smell, and hear. As I did, my fear faded, and it gave me the energy and enthusiasm to go for it. Then I kept seeing and feeling my sensible vision, until I came up with a way to get there. I used my rope to lasso a tree stump on the other side, and pulled myself across. He downplayed how difficult it had actually been. I got to the other side of the river and made my way up to the peak. The old man asked, What was the higher peak like? The young man's eyes sparkled. It was amazing. The old
If you
man
haven't hit
laughed.
that like button already, make sure
Amazing.
you tap it.
How?
There's nothing to
The
hit
young
that
man
button.
looked over at the higher peak in the distance. It was breathtaking. I could see the valley I came through, and I could see this peak. He looked back at the old man. But the biggest thing I saw was why you use the word truly so often. Like truly appreciating and managing your good times, and truly learning and making things better in your bad times. You mean seeing the truth, not what I wish for or fear is happening, but what is really true about my good or bad time. Now I'm hoping that I can experience my future peaks and valleys with more curiosity about the truth. I'll ask myself, what is the truth in this situation I'm in? The old man said, I just got truth bumps. What most people call goosebumps. It happens when I hear a truth. The young man laughed and thanked the old man. They continued on talking until it was time for the young man to return to his valley home. When they said their goodbyes, they did not know it would be the last time that they would see each other. Chapter 8. Using Peaks and Valleys. When the young man returned to his valley, his family and friends noticed that he had changed a great deal. They enjoyed being around him more, although they did not know why. However, the company was in trouble and losing even more money. The young man thought back to the days when he first joined the prosperous company, and he wondered why things were so different now. He remembered when they used to feel excited about looking for ways to improve every aspect of the business. They often asked themselves questions and did not assume they already knew the answers. They took nothing for granted. But success had gone to their heads. They were not doing the things that had made them successful. They lost that sense of urgency and curiosity. Instead, as things turned bad, many became anxious or even angry. When they tried to fix things, their energy went in the wrong directions, blaming others or defending themselves. No wonder the company couldn't seem to get out of its valley. Too many employees' thoughts and actions were actually deepening and extending the valley. Then one day at work, the company was hit with what everyone thought was very bad news. They had been the exclusive manufacturer of a unique and very profitable product. Now, a much bigger company was entering their field and coming out with a similar product at a lower price. With its huge marketing budget, the bigger company might easily put them out of business. His company created a new marketing plan, but people had little hope that it would do much good. The young man met with his department and asked everyone to think about two questions. What is the truth in this situation? How can we use the good that's hidden in this bad time? He encouraged everyone to offer their best answers in an emergency meeting scheduled for early the next morning. When the meeting began, one woman said, "No one knows more about this kind of product than we do. We have more customers who have been using this product longer than anyone else." And someone added, "The truth is, they have a huge marketing budget. We need to do something we are better at than they are." The team agreed that both things were true. Then the young man asked, "So, where is the hidden good in this bad time that we can use to our advantage?" One older gentleman said, "What if we focus on staying ahead of our competition by coming up with a much better product than theirs?" Suddenly, the young man's team saw the hidden good. The competitor's big marketing campaign would make people more aware of this kind of product, but they would have the better product. In a way, their competitor would be doing their marketing for them. The young man asked the team if they wanted to create and follow a sensible vision, a picture of a better future that made sense to them. The team agreed and began to imagine in specific and believable detail what it would be like to have a far better product, one that customers loved so much they would buy it, use it, and tell others about it. The team imagined listening to customers to learn what they truly wanted, and sharing what they learned with the rest of the company. Then they did it. They listened and added wonderful features to their product that people valued. By the time their giant competitors' marketing began, their own company had improved the product greatly, and many more customers bought it. They gained a reputation for great service, and as word spread, the company's fortunes rose. People's jobs soon became more secure. The young man went on to share more of what he had learned about peaks and valleys with others in the company. They discussed it among themselves and realized their former arrogance had taken them off their peak and vowed they would not become so complacent again. The young man and his team received a raise, and they continued to look for new ways to help the company. They asked questions and did not assume that they knew all the answers. The young man was happy to see his company back on a peak again, but he also knew how easy it would be to fall into a valley if they didn't manage this good time wisely. He remembered what he had learned. To stay on a peak longer, be humble and grateful. Do more of what got you there. Keep making things better. Do more for others. Save resources for your upcoming valleys. He smiled, knowing that he was finally learning how to manage his good times better. He had already decided he would do things differently in the future, including saving and investing some of his increased salary to help him through the valleys that would surely come his way. One day, the young man was surprised and happy to learn that he had been promoted. He could not wait to share his news with his family and the young woman he cared about. And then,
What could I just start
his heart
keeping
sank.
to myself?
The last time he had shared great news from work, it had not gone well. He recalled when he began to succeed before, how arrogant he had been, and how unaware of it he was. He remembered how his friends had begun avoiding him, including the young woman he cared about. Now he was afraid that his boastful ways might have cost him his relationship with her. But instead of becoming discouraged by his fear, he resolved to apply his new peaks and valleys approach. He would say less and do more. If I do lose this relationship, he told himself, I will trust that there is a hidden good in that valley too. Or better yet, maybe I can create a better relationship with her when I have learned to be a little more humble and a lot more loving. Then he laughed at himself. A little more humble, he said out loud. He decided he wanted to grow into a more loving and attractive person. He now believed that by becoming more loving himself, by replacing fear with love, he was more likely to be loved and to attract a truly fulfilling relationship into his life. In the days that followed, he created another sensible vision. This time, he imagined himself becoming the kind of person that a woman like her would want to be with. And perhaps more important, the kind of person he would like to be. He imagined his better self in every detail. He would become someone who didn't take himself too seriously, someone who was fun to be with, yet someone who cared deeply about creating real excellence in his life and work. He would be a man who wanted to make a difference in the world, perhaps a small difference, but a significant one, and he would never take for granted the people closest to him. For a change, the young man did not talk about this to anyone. He just held this picture and feeling very clearly in his mind and heart. Then he did the things that made it happen, starting with small things. In time, he became more like the man he had imagined. He remembered asking long ago, exactly how do you manage a valley? Now, he wrote his answer in his notebook. You get out of a valley sooner when you manage to get outside of yourself. At work, by being of greater service.
Psychedelics definitely take you outside
And
of
in
yourself.
life, by being more loving. One evening, before he started to work in his new position, his parents held a small celebration for him. Most of his friends came, including the young woman who had now grown fond of him. Late that night, he asked his father what his life had been like as a young man. As he listened to his father's stories about some of the personal peaks and valleys he'd had on his own journey, he realized that his father had a wisdom of his own. Over time, the two men began to grow closer. The young man's career continued to flourish, and his parents were happy for him. He still argued with them at times, but he had become less defensive, and their arguments were mild. Many turned to thoughtful discussions. The young man went on to make many discoveries of his own. One of the most useful things he found was surprisingly simple. Whenever he got confused about how to get out of a valley, he remembered that peaks and valleys are opposites. So he looked at what he did that put him in the valley, and then he did just the opposite. And he got the opposite results. It was amazing how obvious this was, but he couldn't get over how well it worked. As he grew older, he began to pass through his valleys with increasing grace and serenity. Despite his busy schedule, the young man still made time to walk in his valley's meadows, often with the young woman he cared about. Then one day, he received painful news he knew would come sooner or later. The old man of the peak had died. All who had known him said that they could feel his presence, especially near the summit. Even after he was gone for a long time, his friend from the valley knew he would miss him very much. The young man looked out at the valley. He feared an important part of his life was now missing, and would be gone forever. He had grown very attached to the old man, and now he began to feel more alone and unhappy. He felt the pain in his heart, and wondered what the truth was. Then he imagined the old man's voice saying, "A valley is a time when you long for what is missing." And then he laughed, and in a whisper finished the old man's sentence. And a peak is a time when you appreciate what you have. He thought about what he had to appreciate. The truth was that he now had a way of working and living that clearly made him more peaceful and successful in both good and bad times. And he had gotten that from his old friend. He knew he had been in a personal valley just moments ago, because he thought the old man should still be with him, sharing his wisdom and
That's kind
zest
of
for life.
selfish and shit.
But now, the young man took a deep breath and looked at what was real, not at what he wished for or feared was real. The truth was the old man had given him gifts that, if he applied them, would serve him and those around him well for many years to come. In a way, part of the old man was within him and would always be with him. His eyes moistened. He felt the sadness and joy of having had such a good friend in his life. He realized that his work in life would always be a series of peaks and valleys. He would live through times of financial, emotional, and spiritual ups and downs, through health and illness, joy and pain. He accepted that this repeating pattern was part of the complex richness of being alive. But now he knew that using the peaks and valleys approach could really help make the good and bad times work better for him. He thought about how much his work and life had changed, and how grateful he was to his old friend. Then he remembered the promise he had made the day they first met. "I'll tell you about peaks and valleys," the old man had said, "on the same condition my friend asked of me. That is, if you find it useful, you'll see if you can find a way to share it with others." The young man
See, that's
thought
what I'm
he had
doing.
tried to do that the
I
best he
found
could,
this book
but
useful
now
in my
he
life,
felt he
and
wanted.
since I couldn't explain it, like word for word, and what the meaning it did for me, like I found a way to like share this book and a bunch of other books that I felt impacted me on my journey. Some people hold the information, keep it. They don't want you to be successful like them. They want to just be at the top by themselves. So when they fall by themselves. Me, it ain't no falling shit, cause the way I'm doing it, like shit, is just I'm gonna do my life's purpose until I exit out this motherfucker. Like, so you won't ever see me down, like, cause I'm always keep pressing forward as long as I'm alive. Like shit, with my mindset, nothing is negative. There is no valleys. Like it's all. So I'm always at my peak.
To do more. He wanted to find a better way to share the gifts his old friend had given him. So he went down by the river to a friend's cabin, where he could be alone and think. He asked himself what he had found most useful about the peaks and valleys approach. He thought about his own experiences, and he looked back through the notes he had taken. There were so many things that he found helpful. Eventually, he began to write a summary of what he found most valuable. He made it brief, so it could fit on a small card. He planned to share it with those who really wanted to know. Then he smiled, as he realized the card could be a useful reminder for him too. It could help him remember to use the remarkable peaks and valleys principles and tools more often. In the days and months that followed, he found several opportunities to help others by passing along the summary. Using your peaks and valleys, at work and in life. To manage your good and bad times, make reality your friend. Whether you are temporarily up on a peak or down in a valley, ask yourself, what is the truth in this situation? To get out of a valley sooner, find and use the hidden good in a bad time. Relax, knowing that valleys end.
Actually,
Do the opposite of what puts you in the valley. Get outside of yourself. Be of more service at work and more loving in life. Avoid comparisons. Uncover the good that is hidden in a bad time and use it soon to your advantage. To stay on a peak longer, appreciate and manage your good times wisely. Be humble and grateful. Do more of what got you there. Keep making things better. Do more for others. Save resources for your upcoming valleys. To get to your next peak, follow your sensible vision. Imagine yourself enjoying a better future in such specific, believable detail that you soon enjoy doing what takes you there. To help people, share it with others. Help people make good and bad times work for them too. Chapter 9. Enjoying a Peak. Many decades later, the once young man had grown into an old man himself. He had moved long ago to his own peak, where he lived most of the time, although he still returned occasionally to the valley. One day after lunch, he sat under a tree, enjoying the magnificent view. He thought back on his life and recalled how, when he was younger, he had created many of his good and bad times without realizing it. He fondly remembered the old man who had shared with him such invaluable ways to deal with the ups and downs that came his way. What an extraordinary difference it had made in his work and life. become remarkably peaceful and successful in both good and bad times. He remembered how much he owed the old man. Then, he smiled as he imagined the old man's voice, reminding him that the real credit goes to the person who learns and uses it. Then he heard a sound and turned to look, but he did not see anything, and returned to his thoughts. He valued the time when he had been back in his valley, but he preferred to spend most of his time on the higher peak, where he had built a great home. He enjoyed inviting friends and family here to join him. He earned a reputation as a generous host and a thoughtful friend. And he had been happily married for many years now to that special woman who had grown to love him dearly. The man realized that what counted was not where a person lived, but how a person lived. It did not matter whether it was in a fertile valley like his parents, or on a magnificent peak like the old man. Now he lived what he knew, that a joyful, rich life is a naturally changing landscape of peaks and valleys. At last, he felt that he was not only on a peaceful journey, but that even before he reached his destination, he had already arrived. He smiled. The sound he thought he had heard earlier grew louder and nearer. He looked up and saw a startled young woman who said, "Sorry, I didn't mean to intrude on you." She explained that she had just come up to the peak after a long journey from her valley home. She looked like she was more than tired. As they began to talk, she was surprised to hear herself describing to a total stranger some of the difficulties she was having in her valley. For reasons she did not understand, the young woman felt there was something special about this old man. At that moment, the young woman had no way of knowing that she was meeting one of the most peaceful and successful people in the world. He just seemed like a nice old man. As the day went on, they began to discuss what the old man called a peaks and valleys approach. He said it was a philosophy with skills, a way of looking at things and doing things that makes you calmer and more successful in good and bad times. He noticed she listened well, and hoped she would use what she was about to discover at an even younger age than he did. He thought, it's never too soon to make good and bad times work for you. When she asked to know more, the old man readily agreed, on one condition. The young woman quickly responded, "Yes, if I find it works as well for me as it seems to have worked for you, I would be honored to share it with others."
Hope this fucking music don't even be copyrighted.
After the story. As Anne finished the story, Michael nodded. He seemed to be lost in thought. Eventually, he said, "You've given me a lot to think about. I guess I'm actually wondering how I could apply this story in real life. My situation is complicated." Anne nodded. "That's how I felt when I first heard the story, until it occurred to me that maybe I was the one complicating things." "How so?" Michael asked. "The more I thought about the story, the more it seemed like, well, great common sense." Michael sipped his coffee slowly and said, "There is a lot to this." Then he paused and added, "I hope I can remember to use it." Anne reached into her purse and handed him a small card. She offered, "Here, this may help." Michael saw that it was a summary of the peaks and valleys approach to managing good and bad times. He said, "Thank you very much." Anne smiled. "My pleasure. Besides, I promised the person who first told me that when I had the opportunity I would share it with others," Michael said. Anne laughed. "How did you guess?" For the next few days, Michael wondered how he might use what he got from the story to solve some real problems he was having. The software company where Michael worked had begun sending many of its jobs overseas. He had the feeling his job might be next. What is the hidden good in this bad time? He couldn't really see anything good about it. What is the truth in this situation? The truth was, he was good at what he did. But another truth was that the market for what he did was evaporating. Or was it? Be of more service. How did that apply here? Peaks and valleys are connected. The wise things you do in today's valleys create tomorrow's peaks. Was his company clinging to the past? Perhaps they needed to take a fresh look at how they might service new types of clients. Maybe now was the time to start envisioning their next peak in thorough, realistic detail. He started sharing this thought with a few people at work who seemed open to new ideas. They formed a working group and found several innovative ways to provide better service to more clients. When they did the things that made it happen, it made a big difference. And the more they did, the more things improved. As things began looking up at work, Michael's thoughts turned to home. Things with his wife, Linda, were not great. The stress of both their jobs and their difficult financial times had been hard on their marriage. Michael remembered how happy he and Linda had been when they were first married. Do more of what got you there. What had taken them to that happy place? What did they need to do more of again? He remembered how he used to notice so many things about Linda that he loved and appreciated. Now, had he taken these things for granted? He looked for ways to get outside himself and be more loving. He started doing little things for her. It didn't take long for Linda to notice. Later, he told her about the peaks and valleys story and the impact it had on him. Things have really improved between us, he said. He paused. Linda finished his thought. That's true. But you're still in a deep valley with Kevin. Michael nodded. He and their teenage son were on such bad terms, they were hardly speaking. He wished Kevin would take his academics more seriously and not spend so much time playing music with his friends. He had been thinking about this for days, asking himself, what is the truth in this situation? The truth was that he didn't like his son's interest in music, but the boy loved it. Wishing leads to no action. Michael knew he had to stop wishing and make reality his friend. He decided to create a sensible vision for the two of them. He imagined what kind of father he wanted to be and what kind of friendship he wanted to have with his son. He couldn't control what his son did, but he could control what he did. He imagined going to hear a concert with Kevin's band performing, the sound of the audience cheering and clapping, the look of joy and pride on Kevin's face, the feeling of his son giving him a bear hug backstage after the concert. And then he began to do the things that would take him to the peak he had created in his mind. He stopped criticizing his son and began going down to the basement to listen when the boys' band met to practice. He didn't say anything. He just listened, smiled, and waved when he left. It didn't happen quickly, but over time Kevin began responding to his dad's change of heart. Linda couldn't help but notice and asked, "What's happening to my former cynic?" Michael laughed. Linda began wondering if there might be some way she could use the peaks and valleys approach in her own work. The school where she worked had just gone through another budget cut, and times were tense. One day, she shared the peaks and valleys story with a friend on the faculty who had an idea. Why not teach this approach to the students? The two of them began setting up peaks and valleys study groups and meeting with students after school to help them deal with their hard times and get the most out of their good times. Soon, the peaks and valleys approach was having an impact on a lot of kids' lives and on the teachers' lives too. It spread to other schools, and Linda was put in charge of the program. Linda loved telling Michael about it. One evening, they celebrated by going out to dinner at the same small cafe where Michael had first heard about peaks and valleys from Ann Carr. They both knew that their work and lives had improved, but they were realistic enough to realize that there might well be some bad times ahead. However, they also knew that they now had some remarkable principles and practical ways to help them make their good and bad times work better for them. And they felt very good knowing that they would have many other opportunities to share it with others.
Spencer Johnson, MD, is one of the world's most respected thinkers and beloved
That's
authors.
the end of that book. See, like I told y'all, that was a short book. Well, it was actually, this live lasted 2 hours, but the book was only an hour and 41 minutes long. So that's a dope book. I don't know how y'all truly felt about it. He has another book called Who Moved My Cheese, which is another dope book. Let me see how long that one is. Like, and they both got the type of same concepts. And that book might be like super short too. So we might be able to do that 3 books in one day. Maybe 50. Yeah, like shit. It's only 56 minutes. Fuck it. It's the same
Moved my cheese. The story. Once, long ago
Trying to
in
get
a
the
land
watch
far
time hours
away,
up.
there lived 4 little characters who ran through a maze looking for cheese to nourish them and make them happy. 2 were mice, named Sniff and Scurry, and 2 were little people, beings who were as small as mice but who looked and acted a lot like people today. Their names were Hem and Haw. Due to their small size, it would be easy not to notice what the 4 of them were doing. But if you looked closely enough, you could discover the most amazing things. Every day the mice and the little people spent time in the maze looking for their own special cheese. The mice, Sniff and Scurry, possessing simple brains and good instincts, searched for the hard-nibbling cheese they liked, as mice often do. The 2 little people, Hem and Haw, used their complex brains, filled with many beliefs and emotions, to search for a very different kind of cheese, with a capital C, which they believed would make them feel happy and successful. As different as the mice and little people were, they shared something in common. Every morning, they each put on their jogging suits and running shoes, left their little homes, and raced out into the maze looking for their favorite cheese. The maze was a labyrinth of corridors and chambers, some containing delicious cheese. But there were also dark corners and blind alleys leading nowhere. It was an easy place for anyone to get lost. However, for those who found their way, the maze held secrets that let them enjoy a better life. The mice, Sniff and Scurry, used the simple trial-and-error method of finding cheese. They ran down one corridor, and if it proved empty, they turned and ran down another. They remembered the corridors that held no cheese and quickly went into new areas. Sniff would smell out the general direction of the cheese, using his great nose, and Scurry would race ahead. They got lost, as you might expect, went off in the wrong direction and often bumped into walls. But after a while, they found their way. Like the mice, the 2 little people, Hem and Haw, also used their ability to think and learn from their past experiences. However, they relied on their complex brains to develop more sophisticated methods of finding cheese. Sometimes they did well, but at other times their powerful human beliefs and emotions took over and clouded the way they looked at things. It made life in the maze more complicated and challenging. Nonetheless, Sniff, Scurry, Hem and Haw all discovered, in their own way, what they were looking for. They each found their own kind of cheese one day at the end of one of the corridors in Cheese Station C. Every morning after that, the mice and the little people dressed in their running gear and headed over to Cheese Station C. It wasn't long before they each established their own routine. Sniff and Scurry continued to wake early every day and race through the maze, always following the same route. When they arrived at their destination, the mice took off their running shoes, tied them together and hung them around their necks, so they could get to them quickly whenever they needed them again. Then they enjoyed the cheese. In the beginning, Hem and Haw also raced toward Cheese Station C every morning to enjoy the tasty new morsels that awaited them. But after a while, a different routine set in for the little people. Hem and Haw woke each day a little later, dressed a little slower, and walked to Cheese Station C. After all, they knew where the cheese was now and how to get there. They had no idea where the cheese came from, or who put it there. They just assumed it would be there. As soon as Hem and Haw arrived at Cheese Station C each morning, they settled in and made themselves at home. They hung up their jogging suits, put away their running shoes and put on their slippers. They were becoming very comfortable now that they had found the cheese. "This is great," Him said. "There's enough cheese here to last us forever." The little people felt happy and successful, and thought they were now secure. It wasn't long before Him and Haw regarded the cheese they found at Cheese Station C as their cheese. It was such a large store of cheese that they eventually moved their homes to be closer to it, and built a social life around it. To make themselves feel more at home, Him and Haw decorated the walls with sayings and even drew pictures of cheese around them which made them smile. One read sometimes Him and Haw would take their friends back to see their pile of cheese at Cheese Station C, and point to it with pride, saying, "Pretty nice cheese, huh?" Sometimes they shared it with their friends and sometimes they didn't. "We deserve this cheese," Him said. "We certainly had to work long and hard enough to find it." He picked up a nice fresh piece and ate it. Afterward, Him fell asleep, as he often did. Every night the little people would waddle home, full of cheese, and every morning they would confidently return for more. This went on for quite some time. After a while Him's and Haw's confidence grew into the arrogance of success. Soon they became so comfortable they didn't even notice what was happening. As time went on, Sniff and Scurry continued their routine. They arrived early each morning and sniffed and scratched and scurried around Cheese Station C, inspecting the area to see if there had been any changes from the day before. Then they would sit down to nibble on the cheese. One morning they arrived at Cheese Station C and discovered there was no cheese. They weren't surprised. Since Sniff and Scurry had noticed the supply of cheese had been getting smaller every day, they were prepared for the inevitable and knew instinctively what to do. They looked at each other, removed the running shoes they had tied together and hung conveniently around their necks, put them on their feet and laced them up. The mice did not overanalyze things. To the mice, the problem and the answer were both simple. The situation at Cheese Station C had changed. So, Sniff and Scurry decided to change. They both looked out into the maze. Then Sniff lifted his nose, sniffed, and nodded to Scurry, who took off running through the maze, while Sniff followed as fast as he could. They were quickly off in search of new cheese. Later that same day, Him and Haw arrived at Cheese Station C. They had not been paying attention to the small changes that had been taking place each day, so they took it for granted their cheese would be there. They were unprepared for what they found. "What? No cheese?" Him yelled. He continued yelling, "No cheese? No cheese?" as though if he shouted loud enough someone would put it back. "Who moved my cheese?" he hollered. Finally, he put his hands on his hips, his face turned red, and he screamed at the top of his voice, "It's not fair." Haw just shook his head in disbelief. He, too, had counted on finding cheese at Cheese Station C. He stood there for a long
got
time,
comfortable with
frozen
that.
with shock.
Thought it was gonna be
He
there
was just
forever.
not ready for this. Him was yelling something, but Haw didn't want to hear it. He didn't want to deal with what was facing him, so he just shut everything out. The little people's behavior was not very attractive or productive, but it was understandable. Finding cheese wasn't easy, and it meant a great deal more to the little people than just having enough of it to eat every day. Finding cheese was the little people's way of getting what they thought they needed to be happy. They had their own ideas of what cheese meant to them, depending on their taste. For some, finding cheese was having material things. For others it was enjoying good health or developing a spiritual sense of well-being. For Haw, cheese just meant feeling safe, having a loving family someday and living in a cozy cottage on Cheddar Lane. To him, cheese was becoming a big cheese in charge of others and owning a big house atop Camembert Hill. Because cheese was important to them, the two little people spent a long time trying to decide what to do. All they could think of was to keep looking around Cheeseless Station C to see if the cheese was really gone. While Sniff and Scurry had quickly moved on, Him and Haw continued to hem and haw. They ranted and raved at the injustice of it all. Haw started to get depressed. What would happen if the cheese wasn't there tomorrow? He had made future plans based on this cheese. The little people couldn't believe it. How could this have happened? No one had warned them. It wasn't right. It was not the way things were supposed to be. Him and Ha went home that night hungry and discouraged. But before they left, Ha wrote on the wall. The next day him and Ha left their homes, and returned to Cheese Station C again, where they still expected, somehow, to find their cheese.
Like the
The
rats, you gotta
situation
move on.
hadn't
You gotta keep
changed,
moving
the
forward.
cheese was
Like,
no longer there. The little people didn't know what to
you gotta
do.
pay
Him
attention.
and
as
Ha
well.
just stood there, immobilized like two statues. Ha shut his eyes as tight as he could and put his hands over his ears. He just wanted to block everything out. He didn't want to know the cheese supply had gradually been getting smaller. He believed it had been moved all of a sudden. Him analyzed the situation over and eventually his complicated brain with its huge belief system took hold. Why did they do this to me? He demanded. What's really going on here? Finally, Ha opened his eyes, looked around and said, by the way, where are Sniff and Scurry? Do you think they know something we don't? Him scoffed, what would they know? Him continued, they're just mice. They just respond to what happens. We're little people. We're smarter than mice. We should be able to figure this out. I know we're smarter, Ha said, but we don't seem to be acting smarter at the moment. Things are changing around here, Him. Maybe we need to change and do things differently. Why should we change? Him asked. We're little people. We're special. This sort of thing should not happen to us. Or if it does, we should at least get some benefits. Why should we get benefits? Ha asked. Because we're entitled, Him claimed. Entitled to what? Ha wanted to know. We're entitled to our cheese. Why? Ha asked. Because we didn't cause this problem, Him said. Somebody else did this and we should get something out of it. Ha suggested, maybe we should simply stop analyzing the situation so much and go find some new cheese? Oh no, Him argued. I'm going to get to the bottom of
See,
this.
how trying to keep
While
going
him and
forward
Ha were
and
still
find some
trying to
more
decide
cheese
what to
while
do,
he trying to just
Sniff
stay
and
there
Scurry
and
were already
complain.
well on their
That's
way.
how most humans
They went
are.
farther into the maze, up and down corridors, looking for cheese in every cheese
Being
station they
entitled
could
ain't gonna get
find.
you nowhere.
They didn't think of anything else but finding new cheese. They didn't find any for some time until they finally went into an area of the maze where they had never been before, Cheese Station N. They squealed with delight. They found what they had been looking for, a great supply of new cheese. They could hardly believe their eyes. It was the biggest store of cheese the mice had ever seen. In the meantime, Him and Ha were still back in Cheese Station C evaluating their situation. They were now suffering from the effects of having no cheese. They were becoming frustrated and angry and were blaming each other for the situation they were in. Now and then Ha thought about his mice friends, Sniff and Scurry, and wondered if they had found any cheese yet. He believed they might be having a hard time, as running through the maze usually involved some uncertainty. But he also knew that it was likely to only last for a while. Sometimes, Ha would imagine Sniff and Scurry finding new cheese and enjoying it. He thought about how good it would be for him to be
Shit, he
out on an
thinking
adventure
positive
in the
for them,
maze,
but he
and to
ain't
find
thinking
fresh
positive
new
for
cheese.
himself.
He could almost taste it. The more clearly Ha saw the image of himself finding and enjoying the new cheese, the more he saw himself leaving
Shit,
Cheese
boy,
Station
now he
C.
thinking positive for
Let's
himself.
go, he exclaimed, all of a sudden. No, Him quickly responded. I like it here. It's comfortable. It's what I know. Besides, it's dangerous out there. No, it isn't, Ha argued. We've run through many parts of the maze before, and we can do it again. I'm
He
getting
was
too old
just
for that,
thinking.
Him said. And I'm afraid
He
I'm
was
not interested
just
in getting
thinking.
lost in
Hey,
making a fool of myself.
he visualizing himself finding more cheese, but then at the same time, like, nah, I'm comfortable here. Like, what? And she was like, well, Hassan, nah, let's go. Like, we did it before. We found this cheese before. We can find it again. That's how some people is. Like, they'll reach a height and then like they'll think it's gonna last forever, but when it don't, like they'll stop trying to reach to that next height. They don't want to do what it took to get them where it got them. Like me, I don't have a problem to keep starting over, especially when I know it's like every new level is like it's a new devil, new things. It's some shit I ain't experienced already. So like I already know like with my mindset is just always keep moving forward like a mice in this book. I don't have a mice brain in real life.
Are you? With that, Ha's fear of failing returned and his hope of finding new cheese faded. So every day, the little people continued to do what they had done before. They went to Cheese Station C, found no cheese, and returned home, carrying their worries and frustrations with them. They tried to deny what was happening, but found it harder to get to sleep, had less energy the next day, and were becoming irritable. Their homes were not the nurturing places they once were. The little people had difficulty
I bet
sleeping
they
and
ain't
were having
inviting
nightmares
nobody
about
else
not
over
finding
no
any
more.
cheese. But him and Ha
Showing
still
off.
returned to Cheese Station C and waited there every day. Him said, "You know, if we just work harder we'll find that nothing has really changed that much. The cheese is probably nearby. Maybe they just hid it behind the wall." The next day, him and Ha returned with tools. Him held the chisel, while Ha banged on the hammer until they made a hole in the wall of Cheese Station C. They peered inside but found no cheese. They were disappointed but
Doing
believed they
extra
could
shit for
solve the
no reason.
problem. So they started earlier, stayed longer, and worked harder. But after a while, all they had was a large hole in the wall. Ha was beginning to realize the difference between activity and productivity. "Maybe," him said, "we should just sit here and see what happens.
Do you
Sooner
see?
or
You
later
could
they
be
have to put
working.
the..."
You could be working, thinking you're doing something towards your goals, and you just like it's worthless. It's not. It's not working. It's not gonna help you. You're just gonna burn yourself out. Like so, you gotta understand. Like when he was thinking, "Hey, I should have left. We should have left and went explored the maze to find new cheese." He should have followed his first mind. Most people second guess themselves. I used to second guess myself a lot. Now, like it's automatic. Like so, you gotta be more like the mice in these situations. They just
He's
kept
back.
moving forward.
Ha wanted to believe that. So each day he went home to rest and returned reluctantly with him to Cheese Station C, but cheese never reappeared. By now the little people were growing weak from hunger and stress. Ha was getting tired of just waiting for their
If I was the
situation to
high, I'd have just
improve.
left
He
him,
began to see that the
the other
longer they
one.
stayed in their cheeseless situation, the worse off they would be. Ha knew they were losing their edge. Finally, one day Ha began laughing at himself. "Ha, ha, look at us. We keep doing the same things over and over again and wonder why things don't get better. If this wasn't so ridiculous, it would be even funnier." Pa did not like the idea of having to run through the maze again, because he knew
I
he would
told you
get
it was gonna
lost
be a
and
tough
have no
pop up.
idea where he would find any cheese.
It's always the
But he
same
had to
one.
laugh at his folly when he saw
Make
what
sure
his
you
fear
give
was
this video
doing
a
to
thumbs
him.
up. So.
He asked him, "Where did we put our running shoes?"
Y'all
It
know what
took
I
a long
realized?
time to
Like
find them.
a troll is someone who like probably you probably didn't have your mom or dad in your life. Like so you always you cling for attention. You want to be seen so bad. Like but you gotta ask yourself, 10 years from now, are you still gonna be trying to troll? And if so, like, do you plan on at least getting paid for it? Like, is this paying you to like talk shit for no reason? Like, this is a positive book, yet you bring negative energy. Like, it's like, and you know what this channel is about, yet every single day. But just keep coming. I don't know, like just keep coming, keep doing. I want to see how in 30 days, if you keep coming here and keep listening, what your are you gonna still be doing the same thing? Cause if so, then shit, you just stuck. I feel bad, but you know what you're doing. Like you know what you're doing. Somebody would. I know this probably ain't your real account for one. You probably got another one that you operate off of. You're scared to show your real self.
Put everything away when they found their cheese at Cheese Station C, thinking they wouldn't be needing them anymore. As him saw his friend getting into his running gear, he said, "You're not really going out into the maze again, are you? Why don't you just wait here with me until they put the cheese back?" "Because You just don't get it,
Yeah,
Hall said.
sure, my
I
bro.
didn't want to see it
Without
either,
smoke ain't
but
got
now
nothing to
I
do with you.
realize they're never going to put
And I'm pretty
yesterday's cheese
sure
back.
without
It's
smoke,
time to
I can
find new
outsmoke you.
cheese. Him argued, but what if there is no cheese out there? Or even if there is, what if you don't find it? I don't know, Hall said.
Get on
He had
camera
asked
though. I
himself
want
those
you to
same questions too many.
I'm gonna subscribe to your channel, and I want to see you get on live, and then I'm gonna troll you and see I want to see how you look. I want to see how you see your mindset. I want to see how you truly are, not somebody behind a phone just commenting. Cause it's the reason you keep popping up. So I want to figure out who are you, blowing sniffer. First I thought you was somebody who did coke, but I don't think it's that. But to understand how you come in here every single day and you mention the same thing, I think you want to be in my position. You wish you had this much confidence as me. You bored? That's what it is. Hey, read a book. Shit. I don't know. There's plenty of other people on live who you could be fucking trolling. You probably do be operating on anybody who on live just tapping in their shit, just talking shit. Telling you, 10 years from now, you will not be doing this, and you gonna be looking back on yourself like, damn, I was a jackass. Why I do that dumb shit? Then if you got your own platform, best believe karma is gonna come back on you, and then there's gonna be people who just steady trolling you. So you gonna remember we had this conversation. So just beware, my brother, or whatever you are.
And felt the fears again that kept him where he was. He asked himself, where am I more likely to find cheese, here or in the maze? He painted a picture in his mind. He saw himself venturing out into the maze with a smile on his face. While this picture surprised him, it made him feel good. He saw himself getting lost now and then in the maze, but felt confident he would eventually find new cheese out there and all the good things that came with it. He gathered his courage. Then he used his imagination to paint the most believable picture he could. With the most realistic details of him finding and enjoying the taste of new cheese. He saw himself eating Swiss cheese with holes in it, bright orange cheddar and American cheeses, Italian mozzarella and wonderfully soft French camembert cheese, and then he heard him say something and realized they were still at Cheese Station C. Hall said, sometimes, things change and they are never the same again. This looks like one of those times. That's life. Life moves on. And so should we. Hall looked at his emaciated companion and tried to talk sense to him, but him's fear had turned into anger and he wouldn't listen. Hall didn't mean to be rude to his friend, but he had to laugh at how silly they both looked. As Hall prepared to leave, he started to feel more alive, knowing that he was finally able to laugh at himself, let go and move on. Hall laughed and announced, "It's maze time." Him didn't laugh and he didn't respond. Hall picked up a small, sharp rock and wrote a serious thought on the wall for him to think about. As was his custom, Hall even drew a picture of cheese around it, hoping it would help him to smile, lighten up, and go after the new cheese. But him didn't want to see it. It read, then, Hall stuck his head out and peered anxiously into the maze. He thought about how he'd gotten himself into this cheeseless situation. He had believed that there may not be any cheese in the maze, or he may not find it. Such fearful beliefs were immobilizing and killing him. Hall smiled. He knew him was wondering, who moved my cheese? But Hall was wondering, why didn't I get up and move with the cheese sooner? As he started out into the maze, Hall looked back to where he had come from and felt its comfort. He could feel himself being drawn back into familiar territory, even though he hadn't found cheese here for some time. Hall became more anxious and wondered if he really wanted to go out into the maze. He wrote a saying on the wall ahead of him and stared at it for some time. He thought about it. He knew sometimes some fear can be good. When you are afraid things are going to get worse if you don't do something, it can prompt you into action. But it is not good when you are so afraid that it keeps you from doing anything. He looked to his right, to the part of the maze where he had never been, and felt the fear. Then, he took a deep breath, turned right into the maze, and jogged slowly into the unknown. As he tried to find his way, Hall worried, at first, that he might have waited too long in Cheese Station C. He hadn't had any cheese for so long that he was now weak. It took him longer and it was more painful than usual to get through the maze. He decided that if he ever got the chance again, he would get out of his comfort zone and adapt to change sooner. It would make things easier. Then, Hall smiled a weak smile as he thought, better late than never. During the next several days, Hall found a little cheese here and there, but nothing that lasted very long. He had hoped to find enough cheese to take some back to him and encourage him to come out into the maze. But Hall didn't feel confident enough yet. He had to admit he found it confusing in the maze. Things seemed to have changed since the last time he was out here. Just when he thought he was getting ahead, he would get lost in the corridors. It seemed his progress was 2 steps forward and 1 step backward. It was a challenge, but he had to admit that being back in the maze, hunting for cheese, wasn't nearly as bad as he feared it might be. As time went on, he began to wonder if it was realistic for him to expect to find new cheese. He wondered if he had bitten off more than he could chew. Then he laughed, realizing that he had nothing to chew on at that moment. Whenever he started to get
You ain't got nothing to
discouraged,
go back
he
to
reminded
anyway. You might as
himself
well
that
keep
what he
going.
was doing, as uncomfortable as it was at the moment, was in reality much better than staying in the cheeseless situation. He was taking control, rather than simply letting things happen to him. Then he reminded himself, if Sniff and Scurry could move on, so could he. Later, as Hall looked back on things, he realized that the cheese at Cheese Station C had not just disappeared overnight, as he had once believed. The amount of cheese that had been there toward the end had been getting smaller, and what was left had grown old. It didn't taste as good. Mold may even have begun to grow on the old cheese, although he hadn't noticed it. He had to admit, however, that if he had wanted to, he probably could have seen what was coming. But he didn't. Hall now realized that the change probably would not have taken him by surprise if he had been watching what was happening all along and if he had anticipated change. Maybe that's what Sniff and Scurry had been doing. He decided he would stay more alert from now on. He would expect change to happen and look for it. He would trust his basic instincts to sense when change was going to occur and be ready to adapt to it. He stopped for a rest and wrote on the wall of the maze. Sometime later, after not finding cheese for what seemed like a long time, Hall finally came across a huge cheese station, which looked promising. When he went inside, however, he was most disappointed to discover that the cheese station was empty. This empty feeling has happened to me too often, he thought. He felt like giving up. Hall was losing his physical strength. He knew he was lost and was afraid he would not survive. He thought about turning around and heading back to Cheese Station C. At least, if he made it back, and Hem was still there, Hall wouldn't be alone. Then he asked himself the same question again, what would I do if I weren't afraid? Hall thought he was past his fear, but he was afraid more than he liked to admit, even to himself. He wasn't always sure what he was afraid of, but, in his weakened condition, he knew now he was simply fearful of going on alone. Hall didn't know it, but he was running behind because he was still weighed down by fearful beliefs. Hall wondered if Hem had moved on, or if he was still paralyzed by his own fears. Then, Hall remembered the times when he had felt his best in the maze. It was when he was moving along. He wrote on the wall, knowing it was as much a reminder to himself as it was a marking for his friend Hem, hopefully, to follow. Hall looked down the dark passageway and was aware of his fear. What lay ahead? Was it empty? Or worse, were there dangers lurking? He began to imagine all kinds of frightening things that could happen to him. He was scaring himself to death. Then he laughed at himself. He realized his fears were making things worse. So he did what he would do if he weren't afraid. He moved in a new direction. As he started running down the dark corridor, he began to smile. Hall didn't realize it yet, but he was discovering what nourished his soul. He was letting go and trusting what lay ahead for him, even though he did not know exactly what it was. To his surprise, Hal started to enjoy himself more and more. Why do I feel so good? He wondered. I don't have any cheese and I don't know where I am going. Before long, he knew why he felt good. He stopped to write again on the wall. He realized he had been held captive by his own fear. Moving in a new direction had freed him. Now he felt the cool breeze that was blowing in this part of the maze and it was refreshing. He took in some deep breaths and felt invigorated by the movement. Once he had gotten past his fear, it turned out to be more enjoyable than he once believed it could be. Hal hadn't felt this way for a long time. He had almost forgotten how much fun it was to go for it. To make things even better, Hal started to paint a picture in his mind again. He saw himself in great realistic detail, sitting in the middle of a pile of all his favorite cheeses, from cheddar to brie. He saw himself eating the many cheeses he liked, and he enjoyed what he saw. Then he imagined how much he would enjoy all their great tastes. The more clearly he saw the image of himself enjoying new cheese, the more real and believable it became. He could sense that he was going to find it. He wrote. Hal kept thinking about what he could gain instead of what he was losing. He wondered why he had always thought that a change would lead to something worse. Now he realized that change could lead to something better. Why didn't I see this before? He asked himself. Then he raced through the maze with greater strength and agility. Before long he spotted a cheese station and became excited as he noticed little pieces of new cheese near the entrance. They were types of cheese he had never seen before, but they looked great. He tried them and found that they were delicious. He ate most of the new cheese bits that were available and put a few in his pocket to have later and perhaps share with him. He began to regain his strength. He entered the cheese station with great excitement. But, to his dismay, he found it was empty. Someone had already been there and had left only the few bits of new cheese. He realized that if he had moved sooner, he would very likely have found a good deal of new cheese here. Hal decided to go back and see if Him was ready to join him. As he retraced his steps, he stopped and wrote on the wall. After a while Hal made his way back to Cheese Station C and found Him. He offered him bits of new cheese, but was turned down. Him appreciated his friend's gesture but said, I don't think I would like new cheese. It's not what I'm used to. I want my own cheese back and I'm not going to change until I get what I want. Hal just shook his head in disappointment and reluctantly went back out on his own. As he returned to the farthest point he had reached in the maze, he missed his friend, but realized he liked what he was discovering. Even before he found what he hoped would be a great supply of new cheese, if ever, he knew that what made him happy wasn't just having cheese. He was happy when he wasn't being run by his fear. He liked what he was doing now. Knowing this, Hal didn't feel as weak as he did when he stayed in Cheese Station C with no cheese. Just realizing he was not letting his fear stop him, and knowing that he had taken a new direction, nourished him and gave him strength. Now he felt that it was just a question of time before he found what he needed. In fact, he sensed he had already found what he was looking for. He smiled as he realized. Hal realized again, as he had once before, that what you are afraid of is never as bad as what you imagine. The fear you let build up in your mind is worse than the situation that actually exists. He'd been so afraid of never finding new cheese that he didn't even want to start looking. But since starting his journey, he had found enough cheese in the corridors to keep him going. Now he looked forward to finding more. Just looking ahead was becoming exciting. His old thinking had been clouded by his worries and fears. He used to think about not having enough cheese, or not having it last as long as he wanted. He used to think more about what could go wrong than what could go right. But that had changed in the days since he had left Cheese Station C. He used to believe that cheese should never be moved and that change wasn't right. Now he realized it was natural for change to continually occur, whether you expect it or not. Change could surprise you only if you didn't expect it and weren't looking for it. When he realized he had changed his beliefs, he paused to write on the wall. Hal hadn't found any cheese yet, But as he ran through the maze, he thought about what he had already learned. Ha now realized that his new beliefs were encouraging new behaviors. He was behaving differently than when he kept returning to the same cheeseless station. He knew that when you change what you believe, you change what you do. You can believe that a change will harm you and resist it. Or you can believe that finding new cheese will help you and embrace the change. It all depends on what you choose to believe. He wrote on the wall. Ha knew he would be in better shape now if he had dealt with the change much sooner and left Cheese Station C earlier. He would feel stronger in body and spirit, and he could have coped better with the challenge of finding new cheese. In fact, he probably would have found it by now if he had expected change, rather than wasting
no
time
tripping
denying
about the
that the
past,
change
though,
had
like,
already
you can't
taken
change it.
place. He used his imagination again and saw himself finding and savoring new cheese. He decided to proceed into the more unknown parts of the maze, and found little bits of cheese here and there. Ha began to regain his strength and confidence. As he thought back on where he had come from, Ha was glad he had written on the wall in many places. He trusted that it would serve as a marked trail for him to follow through the maze, if he ever chose to leave Cheese Station C. Ha just hoped he was heading in the right direction. He thought about the possibility that Hen would read the handwriting on the wall and find his way. He wrote on the wall what he had been thinking about for some time. By now, Ha had let go of the past and was adapting to the present. He continued on through the maze with greater strength and speed, and before long, it happened. When it seemed like he had been in the maze forever, his journey, or at least this part of his journey, ended quickly and happily. Ha proceeded along a corridor that was new to him, rounded a corner, and found new cheese at Cheese Station N. When he went inside, he was startled by what he saw. Piled high everywhere was the greatest supply of cheese he had ever seen. He didn't recognize all that he saw, as some kinds of cheese were new to him. Then he wondered for a moment whether it was real or just his imagination, until he saw his old friends
Was it
Sniff
thought he
and
was
Scurry.
looking at seeing
Sniff welcomed Ha
illusions?
with a nod of his head, and Scurry waved his paw. Their fat little bellies shows that they had been here for some time. Ha quickly said his hellos and soon took bites of every one of his favorite cheeses.
As
He
you can
pulled off his
see,
shoes.
the rats or the mice knew never to go back and let them know, hey, we found cheese. They were just leaving little bits and pieces. Like, but the little humans, like, he was trying to go back and tell his friend, hey, I found cheese. And his friend like, nah, I'm cool. That ain't the cheese I'm used to. Knowing that cheese is gone. Like, he been waiting there forever. Yet he missing out on all type of exotic cheese. So that's how people be in life. Like, you be trying to show them something better, but they be stuck and content where they at. Like, so you can't try to save everybody. So I had to learn that lesson myself.
The laces together, and hung them around his neck in case he needed them again. Sniff and Scurry laughed. They nodded their heads in admiration. Then Ha jumped into the new cheese. When he had eaten his fill, he lifted a piece of fresh cheese and made a toast. Hooray for change. As Ha enjoyed the new cheese, he reflected on what he had learned. He realized that when he had been afraid to change, he had been holding on to the illusion of old cheese that was no longer there. So what was it that made him change? Was it the fear of starving to death? Ha smiled as he thought it certainly helped. Then he laughed and realized that he had started to change as soon as he had learned to laugh at himself and at what he had been doing wrong. He realized the fastest way to change is to laugh at your own folly. Then you can let go and quickly move on. He knew he had learned something useful about moving on from his mice friends, Sniff and Scurry. They kept life simple. They didn't overanalyze or overcomplicate things. When the situation changed and the cheese had been moved, they changed and moved with the cheese. He would remember that. Ha had also used his wonderful brain to do what little people do better than mice. He envisioned himself, in realistic detail, finding something better, much better. He reflected on the mistakes he had made in the past and used them to plan for his future. He knew that you can learn to deal with change. You could be more aware of the need to keep things simple. Be flexible, and move quickly. You did not need to overcomplicate matters or confuse yourself with fearful beliefs. You could notice when the little changes began so that you would be better prepared for the big change that might be coming. He knew he needed to adapt faster, for if you do not adapt in time, you might as well not adapt at all. He had to admit that the biggest inhibitor to change lies within yourself, and that nothing gets better until you change. Perhaps most importantly, he realized that there is always new cheese out there whether you recognize it at the time, or not. And that you are rewarded with it when you go past your fear and enjoy the adventure. He knew some fear should be respected, as it can keep you out of real danger. But he realized most of his fears were irrational and had kept him from changing when he needed to. He didn't like it at the time, but he knew that the change had turned out to be a blessing in disguise as it led him to find better cheese. He had even found a better part of himself. As Ho recalled what he had learned, he thought about his friend Hem. He wondered if Him had read any of the sayings Ha had written on the wall at Cheese Station C and throughout the maze. Had Him ever decided to let go and move on? Had he ever entered the maze and discovered what could make his life better? Or was Him still hemmed in because he would not change? Ha thought about going back again to Cheese Station C to see if he could find Him, assuming that Ha could find his way back there. If he found Him, he thought he might be able to show him how to get out of his predicament. But Ho realized that he had already tried to get his friend to change. Him had to find his own way, beyond his comforts and past his fears. No one else could do it for him, or talk him into it. He somehow had to see the advantage of changing himself. Ha knew he had left a trail for him and that he could find his way, if he could just read the handwriting on the wall. He went over and wrote down a summary of what he had learned on the largest wall of Cheese Station N. He drew a large piece of cheese around all the insights he had become aware of, and smiled as he looked at what he had learned. Ho realized how far he had come since he had been with Him in Cheese Station C, but knew it would be easy for him to slip back if he got too comfortable. So, each day he inspected Cheese Station N to see what the condition of his cheese was. He was going to do whatever he could to avoid being surprised by unexpected change. While Ha still had a great supply of cheese, he often went out into the maze and explored new areas to stay in touch with what was happening around him. He knew it was safer to be aware of his real choices than to isolate himself in his comfort zone. Then, Ha heard what he thought was the sound of movement out in the maze. As the noise grew louder, he realized that someone was coming. Could it be that Him was arriving? Was he about to turn the corner? Ha said a little prayer and hoped, as he had many times before, that maybe, at last, his friend was finally able to a discussion. Later that same day when Michael finished telling the story, he looked around the room and saw his former classmates smiling at him. Several thanked him and said they got a good deal out of the story. Nathan asked the group, what would you think of getting together later and maybe discussing it? Most of them said they would like to talk about it, and so they arranged to meet later for a drink before dinner. That evening, as they gathered in a hotel lounge, they began to kid each other about finding their cheese and seeing themselves in the maze. Then Angela asked the group good-naturedly, so, who were you in the story? Sniff, Scurry, Him or Ha? Carlos answered, well, I was thinking about that this afternoon. I clearly remember a time before I had my sporting goods business, when I had a rough encounter with change. I wasn't Sniff, one didn't sniff out the situation and see the change early. And I certainly wasn't Scurry, one didn't go into action immediately. I was more like Him, who wanted to stay in familiar territory. The truth is, I didn't want to deal with the change. I didn't even want to see it. Michael, who felt like no time had passed since he and Carlos were close friends in school, asked, what are we talking about here, buddy? Carlos said, an unexpected change of jobs. Michael laughed. You were fired? Well, let's just say I didn't want to go out looking for new cheese. I thought I had a good reason why change shouldn't happen to me. So, I was pretty upset at the time. Some of their former classmates who had been quiet in the beginning felt more comfortable now and spoke up, including Frank, who had gone into the military. Him reminds me of a friend of mine. Frank said. His department was closing down, but he didn't want to see it. They kept relocating his people. We all tried to talk to him about the many other opportunities that existed in the company for those who wanted to be flexible, but he didn't think he had to change. He was the only one who was surprised when his department closed. Now he's having a hard time adjusting to the change he didn't think should happen. Jessica said, I didn't think it should happen to me either, but my cheese has been moved more than once, especially in my personal life, but we can get to that later. Many in the group laughed, except Nathan. Maybe that's the whole point, Nathan said. Change happens to all of us. He added, I wish my family had heard the cheese story before this. Unfortunately, we didn't want to see the changes coming in our business, and now it's too late. We're having to close many of our stores. That surprised many in the group, because they thought Nathan was lucky to be in a secure business he could depend on, year after year. What happened? Jessica wanted to know. Our chain of small stores suddenly became old-fashioned when the megastore came to town with its huge inventory and low prices. We just couldn't compete with that. I can see now that instead of being like Sniff and Scurry, we were like him. We stayed where we were and didn't change. We tried to ignore what was happening and now we are in trouble. We could have taken a couple of lessons from Ha, because we certainly couldn't laugh at ourselves and change what we were doing. Laura, who had become a successful businesswoman, had been listening, but had said very little until now. I thought about
Ooh,
the
y'all
story this
more like-
afternoon too, she said. I wondered how I
Y'all
could be
been
more like
listening to
Ha
the
and see
story.
what I'm doing wrong, laugh at myself, change and do better. She said, I'm curious. How many here are afraid of change? No one responded, so she suggested, how about a show of hands? Only one hand went up. Well, it looks like we've got one honest person in our group, she said. And then continued, maybe you'll like this next question better. How many here think other people are afraid of change? Practically everyone raised their hands. Then they all started laughing. What does that tell us? Denial, Nathan answered. Sure, Michael admitted. Sometimes we're not even aware that we're afraid. I know I wasn't. When I first heard the story, I loved the question, what would you do if you weren't afraid? Then Jessica added, well, what I got from the story is that change is happening everywhere and that I will do better when I can adjust to it quickly. I remember years ago when our company was selling our encyclopedia as a set of more than 20 books. One person tried to tell us that we should put our whole encyclopedia on a single computer disk and sell it for a fraction of the cost. It would be easier to update, would cost us so much less to manufacture, and so many more people could afford it. But we all resisted. Why did you resist? Nathan asked. Because we believed then that the backbone of our business was our large sales force, who called on people door to door. Keeping our sales force depended on the big commissions they earned from the high price of our product. We had been doing this successfully for a long time and thought it would go on forever. Laura said, maybe that's what it meant in the story about him and Ha's arrogance of success. They didn't notice they needed to change what had once been working. Nathan said, so you thought your old cheese was your only cheese? Yes, and we wanted to hang on to it. When I think back on what happened to us, I see that it's not just that they moved the cheese but that the cheese has a life of its own and eventually runs out. Anyway, we didn't change. But a competitor did and our sales fell badly. We've been going through a difficult time. Now, another big technological change is happening in the industry and no one at the company seems to want to deal with it. It doesn't look good. I think I could be out of a job soon. It's May's time. Carlos called out. Everyone laughed, including Jessica. Carlos turned to Jessica and said, it's good that you can laugh at yourself. Frank offered, that's what got out of the story. I tend to take myself too seriously. I noticed how Ha changed when he could finally laugh at himself and at what he was doing. No wonder he was called Ha. The group groaned at the obvious play on words. Angela asked, do you think that Ham ever changed and found new cheese? Elaine said, I think he did. I don't, Corey said. Some people never change and they pay a price for it. I see
That's a
people like
fact.
him in my medical practice. They feel entitled to their cheese. They feel like victims when if's taken away and blame others. They get sicker than people who let go and move on. Then Nathan said quietly, as though he was talking to himself, I guess the question is, what do we need to let go of and what do we need to move on to? No one said anything for a while. I must admit, Nathan said, I saw what was happening with stores like ours in other parts of the country, but I hope it wouldn't affect us. I guess it's a lot better to initiate change while you can than it is to try to react and adjust to it. Maybe we should move our own cheese. What do you mean? Frank asked. Nathan answered, I can't help but wonder where we would be today if we had sold the real estate under all our old stores and built one great modern store to compete with the best of them. Laura said, maybe that's what Hall meant when he wrote on the wall, savor the adventure and move with the cheese. Frank said, I think some things shouldn't change. For example, I want to hold on to my basic values. But I realize now that I would be better off if I had moved with the cheese a lot sooner in my life. Well, Michael, it was a nice little story, Richard, the class skeptic, said, but how did you actually put it into use in your company? The group didn't know it yet, but Richard was experiencing some changes himself. Recently separated from his wife, he was now trying to balance his career with raising his teenagers. Michael replied, you know, I thought my job was just to manage the daily problems as they came up when what I should have been doing was looking ahead and paying attention to where we were going. And boy did I manage those problems, 24 hours a day. I wasn't a lot of fun to be around. I was in a rat race, and I couldn't get out. Laura said, so you were managing when you needed to be leading. Exactly, Michael said. Then when I heard the story of who moved my cheese, I realized my job was to paint a picture of new cheese that we would all want to pursue, so we could enjoy changing and succeeding, whether it was at work or in life. Nathan asked, what did you do at work? Well, when I asked people in our company who they were in the story, I saw we had every one of the 4 characters in our organization. I came to see that the Sniffs, Scurries, Hims and Haws each needed to be treated differently. Our Sniffs could sniff out changes in the marketplace, so they helped us update our corporate vision. They were encouraged to identify how the changes could result in new products and services our customers would want. The Sniffs loved it and told us they enjoyed working in a place that recognized change and adapted in time. Our Scurries liked to get things done, so they were encouraged to take actions based on the new corporate vision. They just needed to be monitored so they didn't scurry off in the wrong direction. They were then rewarded for actions that brought us new cheese. They liked working in a company that valued action and results. What about the Hims and Haws? Angela asked. Unfortunately, the Hims were the anchors that slowed us down, Michael answered. They were either too comfortable or too afraid to change. Some of our Hims changed only when they saw the sensible vision we painted that shows them how changing would work to their advantage. Our Hims told us they wanted to work in a place that was safe, so the change needed to make sense to them and increase their sense of security. When they realized the real danger of not changing, some of them changed and did well. The vision helped us turn many of our Hims into Haws. What did you do with the Hims who didn't change? Frank wanted to know. We had to let them go, Michael said sadly. We wanted to keep all our employees, but we knew if our business didn't change quickly enough, we would all be in trouble. Then he said, the good news is that while our Haws were initially hesitant, they were open-minded enough to learn something new, act differently and adapt in time to help us succeed. They came to expect change and actively look for it. Because they understood human nature, they helped us paint a realistic vision of new cheese that made good sense to practically everyone. They told us they wanted to work in an organization that gave people the confidence and tools to change. And they helped us keep our sense of humor as we went after our new cheese. Richard commented, you got all that from a little story? Michael smiled. It wasn't the story, but what we did differently based on what we took from it. Angela admitted, I'm a little bit like him, so for me, the most powerful part of the story was when Hall laughed at his fear and went on to paint a picture in his mind where he saw himself enjoying new cheese. It made going into the maze less fearful and more enjoyable. And he eventually got a better deal. That's what I want to do more often. Frank grinned. So even hymns can sometimes see the advantage of changing. Carlos laughed, like the advantage of keeping their jobs. Angela added, or even getting a good raise. Richard, who had been frowning during the discussion, said, "My manager's been telling me our company needs to change. I think what she's really telling me is that, need to, but I haven't wanted to hear it. I guess I never really know what the new cheese was that she was trying to move us to. Or how I could gain from it." A slight smile crossed Richard's face as he said, "I must admit I like this idea of seeing new cheese and imagining yourself enjoying it. It lightens everything up. When you see how it can make things better, you get more interested in making the change happen. Maybe I could use this in my personal life," he added. "My children seem to think that nothing in their lives should ever change. I guess they're acting like him, they're angry. They're probably afraid of what the future holds. Maybe I haven't painted a realistic picture of new cheese for them. Probably because I don't see it myself." The group was quiet as several people thought about their own lives. "Well," Jessica said, "most people here have been talking about jobs, but as I listened to this story, I also thought about my personal life. I think my current relationship is old cheese that has some pretty serious mold on it." Corey laughed in agreement. "Me too. I probably need to let go of a bad relationship," Angela countered, "or, perhaps the old cheese is just old behavior. What we really need to let go of is the behavior that is the cause of our bad relationships. And then move on to a better way of thinking and acting." "Ouch," Corey reacted. "Good point. The new cheese is a new relationship with the same person." Richard said, "I'm beginning to think there is more to this than I thought. I like the idea of letting go of old behavior instead of letting go of the relationship. Repeating the same behavior will just get you the same results. As far as work goes, maybe instead of changing jobs, I should be changing the way I am doing my job. I'd probably have a better position by now if I did." Then Becky, who lived in another city but had returned for the reunion, said, "As I was listening to the story and to everyone's comments here, I've had to laugh at myself. I've been like him for so long, hemming and hawing and afraid of change. I didn't realize how many other people did this as well. I'm afraid I've passed it on to my children without even knowing it. As I think about it, I realize change really can lead you to a new and better place, although you're afraid it won't at the time. I remember a time when our son was a sophomore in high school. My husband's job required us to move from Illinois to Vermont, and our son was upset because he had to leave his friends. He was a star swimmer in the high school and Vermont had no swim team. So, he was angry with us for making him move. As it turned out, he fell in love with the Vermont mountains, took up skiing, skied on his college team, and now lives happily in Colorado. If we had all enjoyed this cheese story together, over a cup of hot chocolate, we could have saved our family a lot of stress." Jessica said, "I'm going home to tell my family this story. I'll ask my children who they think I am, Sniff, Scurry, him or her, and who they feel they are. We could talk about what we feel our family's old cheese is and what our new cheese could be." "That's a good idea," Richard said, surprising everyone, even himself. Frank then commented, "I think I'm going to be more like Ha and move with the cheese and enjoy it. And I'm going to pass this story along to my friends who are worried about leaving the military and what the change might mean to them. It could lead to some interesting discussions."
Definitely could have
Michael
used
said,
this book when I left the
"Well,
military.
that's how we improved our business. We had several discussions about what we got from the cheese story and how we could apply it to our situation. It was great because we had language that was fun for us to use to talk about how we were dealing with change. It was very effective, especially as it spread deeper into the company." Nathan asked, "What do you mean by deeper?" "Well, the further we went into our organization, the more people we found who felt they had less power. They were understandably more afraid of what the change imposed from above might do to them. So they resisted change. In short, a change imposed is a change opposed." But when the cheese story was shared with literally everyone in our organization, it helped us change the way we looked at change. It helped everyone laugh, or at least smile, at their old fears and want to move on. I only wished I'd heard the cheese story sooner, Michael added. How come? Carlos asked. Because by the time we got around to addressing the changes, our business had already fallen off so badly that we had to let people go, as I said earlier, including some good friends. It was hard on all of us. However, those who stayed and most of those who left said the cheese story helped them see things differently and eventually cope better. Those who had to go out and look for a new job said it was hard at first, but recalling the story was a great help to them. Angela asked, what helped them most? Michael replied, after they got past their fear, they told me the best thing was realizing that there was new cheese out there just waiting to be found. They said holding a picture of new cheese in their minds, seeing themselves doing well in a new job, made them feel better, and helped them do better in job interviews. Several got better jobs. Laura asked, what about the people who remained in your company? Well, Michael said, instead of complaining about the changes that were happening, people now said, they just moved our cheese. Let's look for the new cheese. It saved a lot of time and reduced stress. Before long, the people who had been resisting saw the advantage of changing. They even helped bring about change. Corey said, why do you think they changed? They changed after the peer pressure in our company changed. He asked, what happens in most organizations you've been in when a change is announced by top management? Do most people say the change is a great idea or a bad idea? A bad idea, Frank answered. Yes, Michael agreed. Why? Carlos said, because people want things to stay the same and they think the change will be bad for them. When one person says the change is a bad idea, others say the same. Yes, they may not really feel that way, Michael said, but they agree in order to fit in. That's the sort of peer pressure that fights change in any organization. Becky asked, so how were things different after people heard the cheese story? Michael said simply, the peer pressure changed. No one wanted to look like him. Everyone laughed. They wanted to sniff out the changes ahead of time and scurry into action, rather than get hemmed in and be left behind. Nathan said, that's a good point. No one in our company would want to look like him. They might even change. Why didn't you tell us this story at our last reunion? This could work. Michael said, it does work. It works best, of course, when everyone in your organization knows the story, whether it is in a large corporation, a small business, or your family, because an organization can only change when enough people in it change. Then he offered one last thought. When we saw how well it worked for us, we passed the story along to people we wanted to do business with, knowing they were also dealing with change. We suggested we might be their new cheese, that is, better partners for them to succeed with. It led to new business. That gave Jessica several ideas and reminded her that she had some early sales calls in the morning. She looked at her watch and said, well, it's time for me to leave this cheese station and find some new cheese. The group laughed and began saying their goodbyes. Many of them wanted to continue the conversation but needed to leave. As they left, they thanked Michael again. He said, I'm very glad you found the story so useful and I hope that you will have the opportunity to share it with others soon.
Well, that was the end of tonight's book club. That was Who Moved My Cheese by Spencer Johnson, the same author as the person who wrote Peaks and Valleys. So I don't know if y'all got anything out of that, but I'm pretty sure you did. Quick read, so if you want to cop that book on your own, Who Moved My Cheese by Spencer Johnson. So tomorrow, I don't know what book we're going to play tomorrow, but the book overnight I'm thinking about playing is called Manipulation, Body Language, Dark Psychology. So I'm going to play this overnight, but I'm going to set everything up so it ain't going to be like immediately, just a few minutes. So thank you guys for tuning in. For those who finish Rich Dad Poor Dad with me, thank you guys for tuning in to that video and then coming over. So shout out to y'all. Peace.